Settle in. Let the room go quiet enough that you can hear the soft hum of your own breathing, like the idle thrum of a diesel engine at a lonely rest stop. Tonight, 8 true most disturbing trucker horror stories will unfurl like mile markers in the dark. Each one was told, and retold, and compared against logbooks and dispatch calls, and the blurry honesty of late-night memories. They don't splatter. They don't shout. They creep. They settle in the space between streetlights, and in the way a 2-lane highway can look like a ribbon unspooling forever. If you stay with these tales until the final mile, patterns might emerge in the rear view, a quiet constellation of warnings only visible after you've heard them all. If sleep takes you, that's fine, we'll keep driving for you. If you're awake, listen close. Keep an eye on the white lines, and whatever you do, don't glance too long at the places the light doesn't reach. All right, let's roll. They said it happened on the lava flats, long after midnight, when the high desert holds its breath. The driver's name was Harlan, a steady sort who counted his hours by fuel receipts and favorite radio stations. He wasn't a storyteller by nature. He kept his cab clean, organization neat, paperwork squared away. He'd seen storms you could smell before you could see, and felt tires drift over ice he wouldn't wish on an enemy. But he told this one carefully, like a thing that still carried an ember. He had a paper load, lightweight but tall, strapped and sealed, Phoenix to the eastern plains. He left late to make use of the cool night air. The desert was a wide comfort to him. No traffic, no rush. He liked the sound of the tires and the small symphony of freight, the way a trailer offered up a mild whisper if the road was true. The sky was a black bowl. His dashboard glowed the way a campfire glows when you cup it with your hands. The CB was quiet. The skip would carry voices from states away at that hour. But the air that night held only a gentle crackle, like a record at low volume. His phone pulled no bars. He didn't mind. Mile markers slid by, green, reflective, steady as a heartbeat. He took the old 2-lane cut that saved time, if you were comfortable with your own company. It rolled past a field of ancient rock, black and rippled like spilled coffee burned tight to a hot plate. He'd stopped at a small fuel stop around midnight and bought a coffee that was more memory than flavor. He had receipts, timestamps, everything tidy. Past one, a soft fog rose where fog had no business being. Not the fat coastal kind that eats the world, just a ribbon that lay in gullies and lifted off the rock like breath on a cold day. His headlights carved tunnels through it. The lines on the road brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, as if they forgot their age from one stretch to the next. Harlan turned the ventilation down and listened to the engine's contented note. A sign appeared up ahead, mounted low on a metal post that caught light like a cat's eye. He couldn't recall having seen a sign there before. It was green, the kind that announces destinations, but the face was blank except for a faint dot, no words, no numbers, only a reflective circle near where a small town name might go. It flashed by and left a brief, after-image bright spot in his vision. He reached for the CB out of habit and thumbed it on. Maybe there'd be a driver ahead calling out a wayward deer or a dusting tumbleweed. The speaker filled with nothing. Then, softly, a voice began counting backward. 30, 29, 28. The voice was calm, almost bored, not trying to frighten anyone. It sounded like a woman half asleep, reading house numbers on a quiet street. The numbers ticked evenly, 1 per second, but something about where they landed bothered him. Each number seemed to arrive exactly as a reflective post on the shoulder flashed by. He clicked the volume down, then off. The counting continued. Quieter, but still perfectly in time. He told himself it was a nearby shortwave enthusiast bored enough to read out a countdown. He told himself lots of things. He drank some coffee and let the freight whisper. He passed mile 147. A minute later, he passed mile 147 again. He checked his odometer, then the trailer's shadow in the mirror. The fog looked paler on the second pass. He slowed a touch, no brakes, letting the rig decide the pace. His headlights found the edges of a small rest turnout. He didn't recall one there. It was an older kind, with a concrete picnic table and a maintenance shed standing back from the lot, painted the pale municipal shade of green that never looked new even when it was. A payphone steel shoulder reflected his lights. Maybe he needed a stretch. He guided the tractor-trailer into the lot, eased to a stop, and let the parking brake set with the soft hiss of a sleeping animal. When he cut the engine, the world went enormous and quiet. He stepped down. The night air smelled like dry rock and old rain. His boots sounded too loud on the pavement. He could hear, faintly, a hiss like a soda can just opened. But when he turned toward the vending machine at the end of the sidewalk, it was dark. The payphone's metal cord hung stiff and cool. Under the phone, pinned beneath a small tack, there was a notice. He leaned closer. Last exit before the ridge closed from dusk till 4 a.m. Use caution. Maintenance crew on call. Highway Division. District 2. The date at the bottom was smudged, as if a damp thumb had tried to clear it. He thought it said 1,973. But it might have been 1,978, maybe even 1,993. You can see what you expect to see if you stare long enough. He straightened and looked around. No other trucks. No tire tracks fresh enough to shine. The maintenance shed door stood ajar, and inside he saw a broom leaning against a wall. Something tapped the passenger side window of his truck. Not a sharp knock, more a fingernail, testing a surface. He turned, and nothing stood there but his own rig. Idling memory. He waited a long breath. The night exhaled. The fog on the road had thickened, sat pooled in the shallow dips, as if it had decided to rest. He walked to the vending machine because a person needs to choose a direction when the world is too still. He dug a couple of quarters from his pocket, old change he kept for tolls in places that didn't get the memo about cards. He slid the coins into the slot. The machine hummed, surprised to be awake. As he pressed the button for a bottle of something sweet and cold, a third coin rolled back out into the return cup with a sound that made the fine hairs along his arms lift. He picked it up. It was a quarter. The edges were worn smooth. The image was off a familiar face that didn't look quite right. It felt heavier than it should. He pocketed it and took his drink. "Missed your window," a voice said. He turned. The man standing near the maintenance shed wore a reflective vest and held a push broom bristles down in one hand. He was older in the way desert people are older, with a face cut by weather into a map nobody else could read. The man wasn't watching Harlan so much as the road, his eyes rolling past the fog as if it weren't there. The push broom's handle shone softly. "What window?" Harlan asked, and realized he was whispering. "Between signs," the man said. "You can still make it if you pick the first reflector and mind your lane. Don't look at the second. That's the mistake. They all think the second one will tell you something. It won't tell you anything you want." Harlan considered asking if there was an alternate route, if there had been a crash ahead, if the man worked nights. The man lifted his chin toward the shoulder. "They paved over something they couldn't grade," he said. "The road's new every night out there. It takes some people, not in a bad way, just takes them. Most come back. Some don't. Depends on where you look." From the cab, the CB offered a small, polite click, as if a hand had rested on it and then changed its mind. Harlan turned toward the sound, then back to the man to ask if he needed a ride somewhere. The broom leaned alone against the shed. The lot was empty. He rubbed his thumb along the vending machine's cold face and walked back to his truck. As he climbed in, he paused, caught by something on the glass. There were prints on the passenger window where the tap had sounded. Not full fingers, more like the suggestion of lines. A foggy oval that might have been a hand and might have been nothing at all. He wiped it with his sleeve and the mark smeared and disappeared. He put the bottle into the cup holder and started the engine. The cab filled with the mild, reassuring thrum of his rig waking. He eased back onto the two-lane and felt the faint give of the pavement beneath him. The white lines stared up at him with all the honesty they could muster. 30, 29, 28. The voice returned. He didn't touch the CB. He let the numbers be, like thunder heard far off. The fog reclined and rose in waves. Its edges so clean it looked cut with a blade. The first reflector appeared ahead on the right shoulder, the kind with two small rectangles set at an angle to catch your low beams. He looked at it and tried, deliberately, to keep his gaze there. The second reflector, set a bit further down, tugged at the corner of his vision as if it knew his name. The road narrowed. He knew it didn't, but it did. Shoulders that had felt generous now felt conserved. His mirrors held only the tunnel of his own beams. He found a steady place with the pedal and stayed there. 27. 26. The fog feathered across the roadway like the hem of a dress being pulled along at a lazy walk. The first reflector held him, patient and faithful. He could feel the second on the edge of his sight, a quiet stare, as if it were waiting to see if he'd glance its way. He didn't. He breathed slow, counting his breaths between the numbers he wasn't listening to. 25. 24. The CB whispered a sound like a page turned. Then a voice, not the counting voice, another one, halting, as if speaking with a hand laid over the microphone, said, "Call for the ridge. Call for the ridge." It sounded like his voice. It didn't say his name. It sounded like him anyway. He didn't touch the mic. If a thing wants you to call to it, he had learned, let it want. His dash clock flickered. 1 minute slid backward 12 minutes, then caught itself and shivered to the correct hour again. His phone time did the same. The odometer didn't move for a long breath, and then hurried to make up the difference. 23. At 22, a shape formed ahead and moved away from him. Tail lights, 2 dim red halos without points. They bobbed gently as if mounted on springs not made for their work. For a long time they hung there, at the exact right distance to be impossible to catch and impossible to ignore. He made himself look at the first reflector, then the space between the reflectors, then the thin shoulder stripe, then back to the reflector. He learned the exact measure his eyes could swing and swung no further. The red halos elongated, and then 2 more joined them, faint. He thought there might be 4 trailers ahead, then 6. Then something like a slow stream of them. They didn't throw light the way living lamps do. They were expressions of light, suggestions. They didn't seem to make any sound, though of course his engine filled the air and could have covered a symphony. 21. 20. Ridge, his radio breathed. Like a pillow someone spoke through. Ridge to eastbound. Confirm your count. He kept his hands at 10 and 2, and wrapped them tighter, because hands do what hands want, which is hold. A low rise arrived, a hump in the asphalt that, if taken too fast, would make a tractor's suspension grumble. He eased a little more fuel into the engine and let it carry him. At the crest, the world on the far side did not exist for 1 second. It simply didn't. He drove through a gap where the night had been put aside to dry and then returned, a fraction of a moment still damp and not fitted flush. In that cut piece, the counting skipped. 17. 15. He didn't bother to wonder where 16 had gone. He felt rather than saw the second reflector tilt toward him. Not bend, nothing living, but tilt the way a picture frame can hang crooked after a train goes by. He thought of the maintenance man's face and the kind of patience baked into it, and he kept the first reflector in view, and told the part of his mind that wanted to peek at the second that its time would come. It did not. 14. 13. 12. The lead red halos began to flicker like the breath of a candle that dreams of being snuffed. Something in him wanted to call them back. He had never, to his memory, wanted to call the attention of something ahead of him at night. He wanted to then. He did not. He reached for the bottle of soda at 11 and discovered it was warm. He was sure he'd just pulled it fresh from the machine, condensation damp on his palm. He stuck the cap between his teeth and twisted. It didn't hiss. It sighed, long and tired. 10. The fog thinned. The desert returned in outlines. Mesas lay in the starlight like sleeping ships. The red halos dissolved the way a mirage does when you commit to your speed. He passed a mile marker. It was a number he didn't recognize. It looked like a polite shrug painted on aluminum. 9. 8. His shoulders loosened. The dash clock found the correct minute and stayed. The odometer rolled with small satisfaction. He allowed himself to think about the road ahead, the long arc to the east, the way station he'd hit near dawn. 7. He heard a bird. A small morning sound. Recognizable, ungenerous. The kind that makes a night feel like a night that ends. 6. A long sigh through the CB, like a person thanking an empty room. Then, very far off, a line of music played through static. He used to know that song. Did he? Maybe the engine made it in his head. There are a lot of songs in the world you only hear when you're alone at the edge of 3. 5. 4. The fog lay down one last time, like a dog that has decided where to sleep. The first reflector brightened, then dimmed, then brightened. He didn't try to see if the second had turned to watch him go. You don't wave goodbye to a sign. 3. The night softened. A light hum rose, not from his rig but from somewhere broad and low, the sound big empty places make when they change their mind about letting you cross them. 2. A ribbon of pale blue printed itself on the eastern horizon. 1. The voice stopped. Not at 0. It didn't say 0. It just decided it had said enough. Dawn found him just outside the way station. He pulled in and rolled to a stop. The officer on duty stepped from the little booth with its fluorescent jungle hum and cradled a clipboard against a jacket to keep the morning chill out. She looked up at him with the pleasant, tired expression of someone who has seen every variation of human schedule and still likes people. "How you doing?" she asked. "Where you coming from?" "Phoenix," he said, handing over his book, his license, his neatly folded receipts. He paused. "Came up the cut. By the lava field." She squinted just a fraction, the kind of squint that means that's a problem she can set on a shelf. "You solo out there?" "Tonight." He shrugged. He never made a habit of confessing the odd things that happened between the posted speed and dawn, but something in his fingers wanted to set a thing down that didn't belong to him. He reached into his pocket and took out the quarter from the machine. It looked like a washer now. Someone's hardware project. A circle of metal with a hole in the middle where a president's face should be. He stared at it, and had the peculiar feeling you get opening a door you could have sworn was a window. He half laughed, but no laugh left. He set it next to his logbook anyway. The officer glanced at the metal, and then at him. "Lose a grommet?" she asked. "No mischief in it, only curiosity." "Maybe," he said, and realized he didn't want to put words to the night and make it something that stuck too hard. She scanned his times. "Looks like you cut out for about 40 minutes, she said. "Here." She tapped a line without accusation. "Then you're back on. Could be the satellite. Could be that stretch. Happens to folks. You all right?" "Yeah," he said. "I think so. You want a coffee?" she offered, as if that was the right thing to ask someone who came from a place she had heard about but didn't want a name. He took it. It was better than the one from the midnight stop, which was not a significant achievement but felt like kindness. He pulled back onto the highway as the sun finished deciding to rise. He knew the shape of the day. He would deliver his paper. He would call his sister, because his sister liked to know he was in the world. He would not take that cut at night for a while. He didn't think he was scared of it exactly. He thought the road had asked him to keep something, and he was trying to learn what goes into the keeping of it. A week later, when he cleaned the cab at a truck wash that let drivers use the good hose if they were polite, he found a single piece of straw wedged in the corner near the passenger footwell. It was broom straw, cut clean, not tumbleweed or field remnant. Just one straight, stiff straw, with a pale green thread still clinging to it where it had been bound. He held it between thumb and forefinger, and felt the shape of the maintenance man's patience in it somehow. He slid the straw into his logbook and forgot it there. Years on, when he told this story at a counter to a kid who just learned how to back into a tight dock without scraping anything important, he would sometimes check his pockets for the impossible coin he never had. It wasn't there. He would take a slow sip of unremarkable coffee and talk about the way the fog can sit wrong in a place that doesn't make fog. He would mention the first reflector and not the second. He would never embellish the counting. He would say the voice stopped without saying 0 and let the listener decide what that meant. He would tell it only when the night was steady and the road outside was a dark belt and a couple of sleepers in the lot had their shades drawn low. If the person listening asked the name of the road, he'd say the number and the direction and make a small apologetic gesture with his hand. If they said they'd driven it at night and seen nothing, he'd nod as if they had offered him a kindness. Things he had learned do not owe you their performance when you ask. The highway you get is the highway you brought with you. Sometimes it's brand new. Sometimes it's older than your questions. Every now and then, in a certain light, a green sign without letters would show at the edge of his memory as he drifted toward sleep in a motel that had never known how to close its heavy curtains all the way. He would see the little reflective dot where a town name should go, bright enough to leave an afterimage. He would put his forearm over his eyes and wait for the last number to step into the room and then choose not to speak. He slept okay. Truckers, when you ask them, usually do. They're tired in a way that lets them. And if you ever find yourself in the high desert deep in the small hours, and fog lies in the gullies as if someone set it there carefully, and a sign without a name watches you pass, and a soft voice begins to count backwards from 30, there's no need to hurry. Steady on, hands where they belong. Eyes on the first reflector. The second will wait without you. The road will decide what to do. It usually does. Story number 2. They tell this one about a driver named Clara, who hauled produce by habit and patience, a reefer unit ticking on and off behind her like a steady roommate. She was one of those who wrote instructions on a scrap of paper and slid it beneath the rubber band on her sun visor turns, mile counts, names of exits that the GPS always mangled. People called her careful, not because she was timid, but because she was the kind who knew what a full load does to a downhill and how the wind stacks on a long bridge. She took her music low, her coffee plain, her nights quiet. It was early summer on the mountain line, where the road climbed out of river towns and into switchback country. A slow, clean rain had set in at dusk, and by midnight it had turned steady, the kind that makes every leaf shine and every reflector look newly washed. She had potatoes on the deck, and a reefer unit set a few degrees colder than comfortable, the little engine in back doing its work in soft, periodic purrs. Dispatch had routed her onto the interstate across the ridge, but at the last on-ramp, a trooper stood with his hat brim turned down against the rain, and a flashlight set to gentle. He waved cars through and counted trucks off to the shoulder. "Slide 8 miles up," he said when she rolled her window down. His voice had the calm of someone married to the weather. "We're sending you along Old 22. It'll climb you over. No engine brake through the town. We're sleeping." She took the note and nodded. She had run Old 22 in daylight a handful of times. At night, it was a different road entirely. The sign for the turnoff lay back from the lanes a bit, always a little later than she remembered it, with a white arrow that felt like advice, not instruction. She took it and let the grade pull her in. She did the things drivers do in weather. She checked her mirrors on rhythm, heel to toe, window to window, the world behind her spelled out in 2 small squares of wet glass, each with a thin halo of cab light at their edges. She kept the wipers at a pace that beat the desire to speed up. She felt for the point where the tires rode the film without it riding them. Her hands rested the way a surgeon might rest before the first cut, relaxed but committed. Old 22 wound up along a creek that had carved out a hungry little valley. Its water struck silver by the long strings of security lights hung over the occasional driveway. The road's paint, where it had been renewed, looked too bright in the rain, and where it had faded, it seemed to blink in and out of being as the wipers crossed. A stone tunnel came sooner than she remembered. The signage said the clearance was safe, but her chest did the small tightening a person feels under a ceiling lower than the one they know. She took the center of the lane and rolled on through. The tunnel wasn't long. Its lamps were old, glass bowls bolted to ribbed concrete, dim enough to make the water on the walls look like slow, breathing creatures. The sound in there always distorted, engine note folding back on itself a heartbeat late. Tonight, the echo sounded slightly wrong. It didn't come back half a second after. It came back on a longer leash, like another truck following at a cautious distance. She checked again. Mirror left, mirror right. 2 tunnels in the glass, black, rain, the faint smear of her own taillights on wet stone. She told herself the acoustics were unfamiliar. She told herself a lot of true things, and let them work. On the far side, the road ran straight for a pull of breath, a flat where the creek widened and settled like a sleeve over a wrist. There was a temporary sign planted in the gravel on the shoulder, a bright orange rectangle that announced a detour with black letters and an arrow. Beyond it, a tan pickup sat across the lane facing forward, hazard beacons on, an arrow board mounted in its bed. "Follow me" scrolled up in big amber squares. The erasing rain gave each bulb a soft halo. The pickup's orange pole-mounted beacon turned slowly, a patient lighthouse in miniature. The cab side read "District" in block letters, and under it something dark that might have been 14 or 17 or just the way rain turns paint into rumors. She eased to a stop a healthy distance behind. The pickup bumped its arrow to a left-pointing chase, then back to follow me again. It didn't go to the window, didn't wave, didn't do any of the things a person in a truck does to another person in a truck when the world is making a change. It only sat, arrows blinking. The road ahead narrowed to one lane where a fresh scrape of earth had cut the shoulder away, An honest washout brought down from the hill by a week of rain that had been too polite until it wasn't. There were barricades, and beyond them, a path. The pickup would guide her along the one-way sections. That made sense. She was heavy. The road department liked to shepherd weight when things were thin. She set her flashers to say yes, let her foot off, and pulled in behind at a respectful gap. The pickup began to move. It kept an old-fashioned pace. She could smell wet leaves, creosote from guardrail posts, the faint tang of cut stone. On the creek, a small dim house had a single porch light on. When they passed, it winked out, as if someone inside had finally found the switch and decided morning would have to be met as it came. The first bridge lay ahead, short and low, a concrete plank dressed with fresh gravel on either end. A plaque stood at shoulder height on a short post. There was always a plaque who had built it, how much it had cost the county, some bit of pride hammered out and made permanent. This one read Bridge 1, June 14. No year. She glanced at her dash clock. The digital numbers made their own little aquarium on the dash. June 14. She smiled at the coincidence because people like to gather coincidences to keep their fear tidy. The pickup tapped its brake lights twice as it went onto the bridge, and again twice as it came off. A habit, perhaps, or a signal to say the seam at the far end was higher than it looked. She matched that, easing over, listening to the small change in the sound that told her tires were now underlain by concrete, not earth. The reefer unit behind her thumped, woke, and settled to a contented hum. On the second bridge, the aeroboard blinked a little slower. The rain ticked louder on the roof. The creak, narrowed under the structure, made a tone like a piano note, with a pedal pressed, full and constant. The post on the shoulder announced Bridge 2, June 14. The pickup, like before, tapped its brakes twice at each end, and moved on. She reached for the mic to ask if the pilot wanted her closer. Habit put her thumb on the talk switch. She stopped. Thumb still, the way a person will avoid saying their name in a dark room. The state road channel had a coded squawk. Tonight, the frequency carried only the wash of weather, a billion small impacts condensed into a hush. The grade kicked up. The world closed in tight the way roads in the Appalachians do. The way rock and water and tree insist that if a road is to pass it must do it without dramatics, with the minimum of attention. The pickup paced steady and uncomplaining. She took in its details because attention needs something to pray to. The aeroboard was wired to a control box in the bed, but the cable that drooped toward it vanished under the tailgate, and she couldn't see where it came out again. The rear window was tinted. It reflected only her own white headlights, and the occasional smudge of spray. No tools in the bed, no spare cones, no rakes, just the arrow and the slow spin of amber. At the third bridge, the plaque read Bridge 3, June 14. The pickup didn't brake tap on the far end this time. It seemed instead to glide a hair too smoothly, as if the bridge didn't exist beneath it. She told herself the rain made illusion, that water on glass turns the world into slides. She felt for the grain of the beam under her. It was there. No illusion. And then the fourth bridge, same note, same plaque. By the fifth, the creek's voice had grown large. A chorus that sat low in the body. The pickup rolled onto the deck of the bridge and stopped dead center. The aeroboard held "Follow Me" for 3 heartbeats, then blinked out entirely. The little amber pole beacon kept turning, patient as ever, throwing light onto rain and back again. The tail lights glowed as the rain made ruby out of them. The creek under the bridge said every word a creek can say to a person who has found themselves paused above its back. Clara went to neutral, foot on brake, and watched. There are long ways to wait while nothing happens. This was the kind where time passes by, making itself look like water. She reached again for the mic. Thumb felt the impression of the push to talk, and holding anyway. The radio hiss carried up a brief intake of breath that might have been hers, might have been the world. After a minute, the kind of minute that wears 2 disguises and goes around twice, the aeroboard woke. It didn't announce "Follow me." It leaned into a left-pointing arrow and stayed there, as if the entire road must be taken sideward. The pickup's brake lights glowed harder. Released, glowed, released. The message was something, but she couldn't know what. Up ahead, the single lane jogged left around a small fall of rock and then came back. The guardrail did its best to keep definition. The old paint tried. She started to roll again. The pickup moved. The arrow held left, and the road in fact went left, then returned. An easy problem. She felt fine, but a small, uninvited idea lodged behind her teeth like a seed. There had been no driver in the pickup's side mirror. In the last reflection of her own lights up ahead, she had seen the pickup's mirror, and it had shown a clear plank of glass and rain. Nobody. She arranged her interior. People do that when a question arrives. She set the coffee where it would not tip, pushed a receipt deeper into the cup holder, made small work for her hands. Outside, the 6th bridge announced itself, then the 7th. At the 7th, the arrow board began to argue with itself. Follow me, then a blank, then a caret of light pointing down. A very old program glitching toward symbols that weren't in its job description. For a moment, the bulbs spelled slow. Then they returned to the arrow and held it like a thought. Past the 7th bridge, the one lane stepped among trees. The creek lifted closer to the road, its voice fuller now, less like metal and more like breath. Roots showed at the edge where the past week had pulled dirt away in careful handfuls. A gate appeared after a curve, green and scissored horizon to horizon. On it a sign. Road closed at night. Local traffic only. The gate stood open, the lock spooling on loop of chain to one side, knocked there by some person with a key earlier. The pickup never slowed. It threaded the opening and waited on the far side with saintly patience until her cab passed. Then it took the lead again without drama. She did a thing she did sometimes when she felt watched by something she could not see. She named objects out loud in a list, quietly, as if reading to a child, and letting the child learn that naming puts things in order. Mirror, line, sign, water, rail, light. The truck rewarded that small order by rewarding her with normal. The wheel held. The pedals resisted. The numbers on her dash looked correct enough to be believed. When the 8th bridge came, the shoulder lay expanded to a pullout, a gravel apron with the remains of a picnic table and a trash barrel wired to a post. The plaque read Bridge 8, June 14. The posts of the guardrail wore a seam of green paint that did not match any other green nearby. The pickup pushed on with its arrow set. The pullout spoke to her in a voice made of practicalities. Taking a breath is not a sin. Letting the world go ahead without you is allowed. She considered it. Then let the consideration be a decision. She signaled, took her rig as straight as space allowed, and came to a stop with her trailer square and her cab angled just enough to see the highway again. Her hand went to the parking brake. The hiss in the cab sounded gentle amid the rain and creak and engine. The pickup did not stop. It continued over the bridge and along the curve beyond. Arrow still promising left as though the road could be all one drift. The amber beacon spun deference. In 100 yards, the shape of it thinned, then thinned further, until it was simply not there. Clara sat and counted the seconds between reefer cycles. The unit behind her went quiet, then thought better of it, and turned itself on again with its little diesel sigh. She listened to everything that was not that. In the creek, something like a dozen voices spoke all at once with exactly the same tone, like a choral answer from a crowd too polite to interrupt. It was not words. She knew that even as her mind tried to lay meaning over it like a transparency. She leaned forward, elbows on the wheel, and let her gaze settle on the reflected triangle of her own dash lights on the inside of the windshield. It felt like a safe thing to look at, something on her side of the glass. Headlights appeared behind her. They came up slow and thoughtful in the wet, the way a person who has been driving a road a long time arrives at anything. A truck, smaller than hers, with a light bar that threw clean, official amber sideways onto trees. The kind of vehicle that keeps rope coiled neatly in the back and has a dog-eared manual for a gate nobody locks anymore. The driver's window rolled down, and a face leaned out under a hood, rain tapping the brim. "You hung up?" the person asked, voice pitched to carry but not startle. A woman's voice, steady, with that mountain county music in it. Clara powered her window and let damp air in. "Was following the pilot?" she said, tipping her chin toward the road ahead. "He kept going." The woman looked up the curve, then back at Clara's cab. She smiled a little, a small recognition smile that happens when someone else mentions a thing you don't want to lend too much gravity to. "We've not run a night escort out here in years," she said. "Slide took the shoulder last week. We close it at dark. Open it with the birds." She jerked a thumb at the light bar, at the proper reflective striping, at the real, present rain, on her real, present cheek. You can tuck in behind me and I'll get you to 14. Clara blinked. She leaned again to indicate the other truck, the hazard beacons, the arrow board that had told her to make her whole rig into a left turn. Who was I following? The woman shrugged without meanness. Thing people see from time to time, she said. Don't make a fuss and it won't either. Then practical again. We'll go slow. Decks slick. 12 on the bridges. You keep the weight easy, and you'll be all right. Clara sat a second more in the pullout, then nodded. She set her brakes free, took the wheel, fell in behind the official amber. They move the way you move when you both know the rhythm. Careful. Like carrying something that can't be dropped. At each bridge, the proper pilot braked in a way that meant something not theatrical, not a signal for show, but a conversation with the surface. Clara answered with the appropriate pressure, the proper line. Bridge 9 appeared and had a plaque that read June 14. Bridge 10 appeared and read the same. She decided not to care, and found that caring less made the world kinder. At the 11th bridge, a piece of torn reflective tape stuck to the guardrail flashed in the pickup's rotating amber. It had letters on it, black on gold. Low-me was all she could make out. Just a strip. She thought about the tailgate and the cable that vanished, the arrow board with its bright confidence. She let the thought go by like a truck in the other lane, and didn't reach for it. The gate at the far end of the one lane came into view around a tight bend, its green shape beautifully ordinary, not a portal, not a question. This one was open too, and a puddle lay under its hinge like a shallow plate. The pilot rolled through, then held to the shoulder so Clara could ease alongside and talk. The rain had softened, as if the weather too had gotten what it wanted. You're set, the woman said, lifting her chin toward the long grade that ran down to the highway, and a world that had other problems than bridges and dates. She looked at Clara a second. You all right? You all right? You all right? I think so, Clara said, and smiled because smiling is how you leave a thing behind properly. Didn't know I could feel a bridge watching me until tonight. Bridges have good manners, the woman said. They look after you while you're on them and forget you completely when you're off. Best kind of attention. She tapped her light bar. If you tell anyone at the truck stop about the other truck, don't name the color. People get the color wrong and then they start arguing about paint. She rolled her window up with a wave, pulled off to lead the next driver through the night that was already becoming morning. Clara let the hill take her. She feathered her brakes with the kind of respect no one watching would applaud, because it didn't look like anything, just quiet competence. She passed the last plaque. June 14. Out of habit, she thought it in her head like a date to remember, but she didn't write it anywhere. At the bottom of the grade, where the old highway met the new world at a small interchange, a highway signboard flashed ramp open. The interstate lay below. Traffic moved, a modest collection of headlights polite in the wet. She took the ramp and joined the stream. She stopped at the first service plaza with diesel and coffee and a bulletin board full of cards for dog walking, for used tires, for prayer breakfasts. A handful of other rigs sat breathing in the lot, sitting their soporific vigil, each a creature at its birth. She walked along the side of her trailer and put a hand on the reefer body. It thrummed. It felt like a heartbeat you could stand next to. On the metal, near the latch handle, the faintest shadow of letters showed, the way a rubbing shows when a page belatedly reveals the last thing written upon it. Dist was clear as day, and a one ghosted after. It might have been oil from her glove. It might have been nothing at all. She licked her thumb and rubbed. The ghost letters stayed or didn't. Hard to say. The rain made all surfaces uncertain. She got coffee and sat by the window where her rig made a picture in the reflection. She ate something wrapped and warm and flavorless in the way such food often is at 2 a.m. The television on the wall played weather and maps, and a friendly voice promising better travel by afternoon. 2 drivers at the next table were talking about a trailer door that kept finding itself unlatched, about how a man had swore he'd closed it, and yet they used the calm of people trading small mysteries like recipes. When she rolled again, the dawn was pulling a faint line between mountains and cloud. In her mirror, for a long time, a small amber light hovered back on the hill, and then vanished the way useful things do when they are done. She drove past the exit for Old 22 a month later, and watched the tree line to see if any piece of it looked different. It did not. She didn't take that road again at night, not out of fear, just because the world is large and hard enough without asking certain places to work overtime on your behalf. If she told the story later, it went this way. There was a detour on a wet night and a helpful truck to follow, and a sense that help sometimes doesn't look back when you need it to. If someone asked the county number painted on the pilot's door, she would shrug. She wasn't keeping score. The road had kept her, and that was that. She'd mentioned the plaques June 14 because they were pretty in their precision, and because detail makes a story sit better in the ear. And if a listener said, as people do, "You sure there was nobody in the pickup?" she would say this, "I didn't want there to be." That's the difference some nights. You can want the world to be a certain size, and if you're lucky, the world will let you drive through anyway, and it will mind its business and you can mind yours. That's all there is to it. Some part of her kept an eye out in other places after that, in a way that was tender, not suspicious. She watched for arrow boards. She found that, for a while, the little amber squares made her happy in the way lamps in windows do. The reefer purred. The potatoes went where they needed to go. The creek kept its own counsel, and in the way roads take care of people without asking for thanks, none of it ever asked her for a name, or for a certainty she didn't have. Story. Number 3. They told this one about a driver named Noah, a quiet hand who preferred the 1,000-mile straightaways where the world becomes a steady rhythm and the sky feels like a lid you can trust. He was a furniture hauler that month, a dry van with stacks of box sofas and dining chairs strapped to E-track, with the kind of care that says, time has taught him all the ways a corner can become trouble. His rig was clean, all the small ornaments of a lived-in cab, a paper map folded to a square by repetition, a roll of quarters for laundromats he may never reach, a small notebook of things that don't fit neat on a phone. He had a dash-mounted air gauge for his suspension bags, a simple needle he had learned to read like a weather glass. Light loads pleased him. Light loads made a truck feel like it could skate. He was westbound across country that didn't need much from you but attention. The plains in their imperceptible tilt, where you can climb 1,000 feet over 100 miles and swear you never left level ground. The fields wore winter's close-shaved stubble and dirt, and the faint green of something getting an early start. The wind had done its daily work and gone to lie down. The night was clear. The radio took a breath and held it. Nothing on scan but the long silence of a continent asleep. His pickup had been slow, delayed by a dock foreman whose forklift had thrown a belt at the wrong moment. He didn't mind. The time put him into the long, dark stretch that stretched just right. He liked the way the tires hummed when you're not fighting weather, liked the small flutters of paper receipts with their thermal ink promising that the life he led was a series of tiny proofs. He set his cruise a few below what the state asked, and let the white lines do their soft arithmetic. Somewhere past midnight, long past the last town, with its single gas canopy and lone late person filling a tank, the needle on his air scale twitched. It wasn't much a hair's width, a blink, but it was twitch in a place that didn't twitch when he wasn't touching anything. He glanced at it and then away. Numbers don't owe you explanations when they don't change meaningfully. He watched the road. A few miles later, it moved again. Not a twitch this time. A slow, considered nudge as if someone had leaned on the trailer with a palm and said, "Here." The gauge read heavier by 500 pounds, then 9, then settled at 1,000 over where it had sat since he'd merged. That was not nothing. He felt the difference in the faint way you can feel a shirt that is still damp at the collar after the rest has gone dry. He ran through the catalog. He was not in a rain band. There was no ice building. Wind would have played with him in other ways, tugging and pushing. The road did not slant up enough to fool a person. The boxes in back were strapped. He had watched the loader use his hands the way a person handles a dog firm, and not unkind. Nothing moved that much on its own. He checked the shadows at his trailer tires in the mirror, a driver's trick for extra eyes. They looked ordinary, round, black, a blur of motion in their predictability. He thumbed the CB to see if anyone was nearby to make small talk of strange gauges. The channel gave him only the soft breath of static. His phone map told him there was a small ag co-op scale 10 miles ahead, and then a lot of nothing until a state-run way station closer to the river. He had time. He could turn curiosity into knowledge and see if the number on his dash matched the one that made the ground sing. He took the county road for the co-op, then the small turn and the smaller turn after, tire beads humming on aggregate that hadn't felt too many big loads lately. The scale house was a square of yellow light in a world that had decided to be generous with stars. A moth made from shadow fluttered round the window. It might have been his own headlamp reflecting oddly. A green sign said, "Scale open," in the steady, unfussy font of useful things. He pulled on. The concrete beneath his wheels changed the note of the engine in barely audible ways. He loved that the ground could talk to you, if you were polite enough to listen. The red light at truck height turned to green. He stopped where a politely bossy sign said he should. The window cranked open with the squeak of something that had been oiled regularly by someone who cared. An older man leaned into the square of light, a face crinkled, pleasant by weather, cap bent in the bill the way time bends things into their best shape. "Evenin', driver," the man said. His voice was night, soft, and practical. "Roll forward just a hair to get your tail on. There you go. Hold it." Noah held. The scale thrummed the way scales do when they decide what truth to tell. The printer clucked and offered up a small sheet that glowed for a second while the ink settled into itself. "You come light," the man said, squinting at the numbers. "You come light and then you don't come as light. That sound right to you?" "Gauge shows I picked up 1,000, Noah said. "Thought I was imagining it. Guess I wasn't." The man's eyes went to the trailer. He didn't go out to it. He didn't ask to open the doors. He just looked like a person looks at a dog's ear when the dog is acting fine. But the ear says something else. "You keep those doors shut," he said, as if Noah had suggested the opposite. "Keep your speed steady. Don't stop on the overpass at 223, no matter what you think you hear. If you have to stop, don't stop there." Noah waited for a laugh. The man didn't look like someone who made jokes with instructions in them. "I wasn't planning on stopping," Noah said. "Good." The man slid the paper across. "Here." The weight was printed. Beneath it, in smaller letters, the machine had stamped a time and date. The numbers made no sense at first because his stomach supplied the wrong year. Then his mind corrected and said, "Yes, that is a number combination calendars have worn before." June, it read, and a day, and a time that was precisely now, and a year that looked like the year he'd learned to ride a bike without thinking about falling. He reached for the slip and the paper felt thicker than co-op printouts usually do, stiff at the edges. "How much to you?" he asked out of habit, though sometimes they just let you through to be neighborly at that hour. The man shook his head. "We got a grant," he said, "to keep the lights on for night-run grain. I like the company, truth be told. You get on." Noah eased forward, off the slab and back onto the dark road that pointed like a parting finger toward the highway. He kept the slip on the dash under the lip where the vent blew warm. He expected, because people expect after odd moments, that the air gauge would decide to behave and set itself close to normal. Instead, 2 miles along, it edged another 200 up as if adding something it had forgotten, making a list more complete. By the time he reached the ramp back to the highway, his dash needle sat at a number he knew did not match the mass of his boxes. The rig did not feel oppressed, not exactly. It felt as if the earth had thickened slightly beneath it. He merged and found the right lane, and told himself a simple thing: let the science do its work. Whatever was true would be true at the state scale. The highway opened the way good highways do at night, a corridor with fences that keep nothing in and nothing out, but provide the idea of a line to follow. Here the land had the odd habit of going on until there was suddenly a limit, a river, a cut, a thing that couldn't be ignored. Signs every so often prepared you gently for that business. In 11 miles, an overpass rose the number stenciled on it in neat, small digits, 223, as if the state were counting to keep itself awake. A no stopping on bridge sign underlined the point. He wasn't stopping. Half a mile before the bridge, the cab filled with a sound. Not loud, not urgent. A faint, polite tapping, as if someone with a patience that had known too many long winters were knocking their knuckles against a workbench just to feel bone against wood. It came from behind him somewhere near the trailer's headboard. He checked the reefer status out of muscle memory before he remembered he wasn't hauling cold. Idle habit. Different load. The tapping did not get faster. It did not ask anything. It made a rhythm that just barely got under his skin because it did not belong to anything he could name. He cracked the window, half an inch of frigid air bristling against warm cab. The sound did not change with the window. It lived inside the geometry of truck and trailer where cab meets freight. He could only hear it because the night was calm, and his truck was in the kind of mood where all its parts were friends. He did not stop. He did what a driver does when a new noise appears. He made a note of it and promised to check the catwalk at the next pull-off. The overpass rose. Its concrete took his tires and made the hum of the road a register higher. The tapping paused as he reached the midpoint the way birds do when you walk under where they're perched. Then it resumed gently, insistent as drizzle. On the far side, the pitch of the tires returned to what they had been. The air gauge moved. It did not jerk. It did not play. It slid. The needle, as if answering a question, said quietly, walked up to a number that made his mind do rough math and get the wrong answers first. Too much for furniture. Too much for his single steel chassis. Too much for the law, if the law cared right then. The truck did not sag. It didn't feel like too much. The engine felt honest under his right foot. The math sat there and did nothing but be math. He tried the brakes lightly, a test touch to see if the weight would lean the way real weight leans. The response was normal. Road straight, wind benevolent, mirrors clean. He considered the nearest shoulder he would consider safe. He considered whether the shoulder had a place that made sense to put 48 feet of trailer onto it in the dark. He decided on a rest area 9 miles ahead. He told himself 9 miles is 9 miles forever and always. You can count it with your hand open and the hand closed again. At mile marker 221, the tapping changed. It did not grow. It lowered, like knuckles turned to fingertips. A soft, measured scrape ran once along the bulkhead, then was gone. His mind supplied pictures because minds hate being left out, and he told it to go sit in the corner and think about simple things like air pressure and thermal expansion. He checked the temperature on his dash. It had dropped 3 degrees in the last 20 minutes. Metal does what it does when the world changes condition. No mystery. The rest area made itself known first by its little icon on a green sign, and then by the slow approach of sodium orange dots gathered into a pool of light. He took the ramp, eased into the truck side, and rolled to a stop where the lot offered an unclaimed rectangle. He put on his vest because he always did when he got down in the dark and opened his door. The cold came in like a polite guest, invited for a short visit. He stepped down into it. The catwalk felt like it always does, a narrow, ribbed path behind the cab, where all the important lines talk to each other. He set his hand on the rubber of the lines, and they thrummed with the lively nothing of air being itself. He leaned and put his ear to the bulkhead. He heard engine, wind, the small tick of cooling metal, the quiet of late-night parking lot. No knuckles. No fingers. He smiled at himself in the way people smile when their own honesty amuses them. He checked his airbags by feel, the way a person checks a melon in a grocery aisle, inflated. Listening. The gauge on the dash had not invented numbers. Something had changed. He walked along the trailer's length, hand trailing the aluminum side, a handshake with each rivet. To a naturalist, there are 1,000 textures of night. Truckers have their own set. He reached the doors. The seals were intact. The padlock, his. The pale dust the road had given him had drawn diagonal lines in the wind, small stories of air and speed. On the right door, at shin height, a faint mark showed in that dust like someone had drawn a straight line with a finger. Nothing extravagant. No word. Just a stroke. He bent and blew on it as if that could make it confess. It did not. Inside the building, the vending machines glowed like aquariums. A map on the wall showed the county in a bright color it did not deserve. A driver with his hood up slept with his head pillowed on his arms at a table built to hold travel brochures. The murmur of a television from the car side offered weather without too much optimism. Noah washed his hands just to hear water. When he came back out, the lot looked the way it had. Trucks lined up, each an animal at rest. His own rig sat where he left it, a mirror for the lights. He climbed in. The air gauge, because machines love to be contrary, had settled 300 down while he was gone, as if to say, "See? Nothing you need to fuss with." He smiled again at the ceiling for the benefit of the small gods that live in old plastic. He set his hands, eased back onto the ramp, took the highway again. Past 219, he found that the needle, like an idea that just doesn't want to be left alone, climbed again. Slow, courteous, unavoidable. He took the climb with it. The road ahead faced a long treeless stretch where wind farms sleep, giant white towers that pretend at delicacy from a great distance and loom like careful accountants when you are close. Their red marker lights blinked in lazy unison. He watched them the way you watch the pulse in your own wrist, not out of fear, but because it feels like proof you are arranged correctly. The needle arrived at a number that would have made a scale house grumpy on a Tuesday. He didn't have to go through a scale house now. The one ahead had been dark every other time he took this route after midnight, the big sign thrown to closed, the window a square of off. He allowed himself that knowledge and what it offered. If it was open, he would deal. 20 minutes later, the highway told him to prepare to weigh. The sign said, "Open." It didn't blink. It just told the truth. And kept quiet. Which is often scarier. He checked his mirrors. A set of headlights far back kept their distance. A patient stranger, not in a hurry to pass. He took the exit, followed the coned line, rolled over the bright new pavement cut for scales. The green arrow above his lane welcomed him like a host at a party who's hoping for good guests. He stopped where the paint told him. The window slid open. A woman in a navy sweatshirt with the state's seal on it leaned forward. She looked like she knew where the good pie was in a 50-mile radius. She had the face of someone who has handed over enough citations and warnings to understand that most people are trying. "Evenin'," she said. "Bring it up 2 feet. Thank you. Hold." He held. The silence pressed in the way silence does, in places that usually carry noise like furniture. The printer, somewhere in the small room, chattered with confidence. She glanced down. Then up. She did not frown. She did not blink. She stepped away and returned with a different sheet of paper than the ones they usually handed. Greenish stock, perforated tear edges that had been folded neatly out of habit, as if from another era. "You picked up something," she said mildly, using exactly the tone someone would use to note he had an extra pallet of water bottles set loose. "You know you're trending heavy." He rested his hands on the wheel so his fingers would be occupied and not reach for anything. "Gage been telling me that a while," he said. "Co-op weighed me back on 230. Gave me a slip. Let's see." He slid it over onto his palm and passed it. She looked at it for a long second, like someone reading handwriting they haven't seen in a long time, not because it is illegible, but because it makes their eyes remember a posture. She touched the date, and then set it back on the sill like it might be warm. "Go ahead and pull to the red line," she said. "Park. Don't open your box." "I wasn't going to," he said, but the words didn't add weight to anything in the room. He parked where the paint made a full stop out of anyone. He slewed his head back to watch the small square of light by the window. The woman spoke to someone on a phone. She gestured with her elbow like someone telling a story who is honest about their hands. A minute later, she came out with a jacket on and walked to his step with the easy surety of someone who has stepped on that same piece of concrete for years. "Not going to write you for anything," she said before he could ask. "Not going to open your box. I am going to ask you a favor." "Sure," he said, because that is what you say when a person in a position like hers says words like that. "Keep your speed even between here and the river," she said. "If you stop on the descent, it messes with the numbers for the folks who come after. If you can help it, don't touch your brakes hard on the 217 bridge. That's where the echo picks up. You'll feel it. At her end. If you can help it." He almost made a joke. Instead, he nodded very seriously because she had offered him seriousness, and it would have been rude to refuse. "I can do that." "Good. The scale record will normalize after 215. Happens every so often. People have theories. I'm not paid to keep theories." She hesitated, then smiled a small, tired smile that was not unfriendly. "I will tell you this much if you pass the old silo with the painted star. Say hello. Folks who do don't tend to fuss with their logs afterward. Can't tell you why." Then, business again, the jacket tugged close. "Safe run." He eased back onto the interstate. The co-op slip lay again on his dash, and he told himself that if it wanted to pretend it had come from a year that had long ago bowed to 1,000 little changes, that was its business, not his. The river lay ahead in the valley, a black ribbon even blacker than its surroundings. The bridge before it lay like a drawn breath waiting to be let out. He set his cruise at a number that would make no story. The tapping returned, very faint, like someone teaching a child to count quietly so as not to wake a sibling. It did not ask for anything. It did not sink itself with the seams in the pavement. It existed the way fog exists, present and not persistent, real if you decided island. Past 218, the first lights of the industrial strip near the water appeared. Sodium and LED mixed into a light only infrastructure loves. A silo rose near the road. A cylinder with its paint brushed off by sun and years. An old star picked out on its side in a blue that might have once shouted and now just spoke its name under breath. Noah lifted his fingers off the wheel long enough to tap the dash like a greeting. He said hello out loud because she had said to say it. He didn't raise his voice. It felt silly and exactly correct. The needle on the air gauge hesitated. It hung, as if considering a reply, then eased left. It didn't drop like a stone. It slipped with grace, a courteous bow from someone leaving a room. 500, 1,000, more. As he took the 217 bridge, the truck felt lighter in the way your mind feels lighter when a noise you have been ignoring decides, out of kindness, to be elsewhere. He did not touch his brakes hard. He felt the bridge take him and then give him back. In his ears, somewhere between metal and water, there was a sound, like a crowd whispering only vowels. He met the sound the way a person meets their own reflection in a window at night, acknowledging, not startled. At 215, the needle returned to where it had sat when he had first counted his load. The truck became itself in a way that felt like a flat sheet pulled tight on a bed. He breathed out, something he had not noticed he'd taken in and held. The tapping in the bulkhead stopped. It stopped so completely he wondered if there had ever been tapping. He smiled at that too. The next service area, on the far side of the river, had the kind of coffee he did not recommend, and the kind of lights that make all faces look briefly like they belong to everyone. He topped off his thermos anyway and stood by the window, and watched his own rig cradle itself in the lot. He pulled the co-op slip from his dash, and looked at it in the bright fluorescence. The ink had the faint blurring at the edges you get when you print at the edge of a ribbon's patience. The time was right. The date looked not right, in a way that made no difference to the fact that the paper existed. A driver with a cap that had once been orange poured sugar into a cup like a person sanding a plank and looked over. "Scale get you?" he asked, in the universal phrase, "For you look like you've just seen math." "Numbers did something I don't understand," Noah said. The man nodded as if Noah had said his truck had blinked at him. "You say hello to the star?" "I did. Good manners," the man said, pleased as if he had taught a dog to sit years ago, and found out the dog still did it. He tipped his chin at Noah's trailer. "Don't open your box." "I'm not going to." "Good." He went back to his sugar work, content that the universe had been kept to a set of rules he recognized. Noah rolled again, like you do after a pause in any story. The part where you test your own memory by seeing if the world agrees with it. It did. The line of red lights on the wind towers fell into rhythm with one another, as if a cue had been given. The road lay itself out with the modesty of a friend who doesn't insist on being in the photo. The loudest thing in his cab was the soft whisper of the vents, and his own mind settling. He delivered in a city built out of brick and glass and ambition. The receiver at the dock had a tattoo of a corn ear on his forearm, and a smile that made paperwork feel like a reasonable pastime. They popped the doors together. The seals clipped off and went into a pocket. The air that came out of the van smelled of cardboard, faint cedar. The glue that keeps flaps honest. No cold breath. No strange weight. The load had not shifted. Straps lay where he had put them. The right door, lower edge, still showed that one line drawn in dust, straight as something a ruler had suggested. He rubbed it with a sleeve, and it didn't disappear so much as move sideways into being part of some other mark. On his way back through the plains a week later, daylight and red-winged blackbirds staking their claims on fence lines, he took a moment when the highway glanced near the old silo again. It looked smaller in the sun than it had in the night. That's how it goes with a lot of things. He lifted 2 fingers, not in salute, just to acknowledge, and kept moving. The needle on his gauge stayed where it ought to. The bridge numbers meant what the county said they meant. And the co-op? The next time he passed, on a different run, the light at the little scale house was off. A hand-lettered sign in the window said, "Back after lunch," in a script a person old enough to have grandchildren might write. He didn't stop. He waved anyway. When he told it later, if he told it at all, it had the shape stories have when people have chosen what part they want to keep. There was a night the world got heavy for no reason you could put on a form. There were instructions offered in a voice that did not pretend to know the why, and there was something about a star painted on a cylinder that made a small difference. If someone asked what would have happened if he had stopped on the overpass, he would lift a shoulder and say he didn't. If they pressed, he'd say the bridge would have held him because bridges generally do, and then he'd talk about coffee because coffee is kinder than speculation. Other drivers added their own garnish, as folks do. Some said a carpenter had fallen from that bridge, or a load had gone into the river decades ago, or the old silo had been a home for a station that broadcast to no one at night. The woman at the state scale, if anyone asked her, would say, "Something about the math out there gets lively after midnight," and change the subject to axle spreads. Because that was the business at hand. Night trucking has its own lexicon of sounds and gauges and requests the road makes. Most of the time, every one of those requests is ordinary and on time. Once in a while, a number leans on you. If it does, you do what you can. Steady on. Eyes forward, a hello to the things that hold the horizon in place. And if a tapping like a polite question sounds behind your shoulder, you let it be. The river will take it from you if it wants to, and the bridge will hold you whether it knows your name or not. Story number 4. They pass this one around among the contract mail drivers, the ones who run white trailers with foil eagles and little blue stripes, the folks whose schedules run tight and whose loads sound like a dry sea when you break rolling cages and canvas hampers, tie-down straps humming a soft note in the wind. The driver at the center was named Iris. She marked her days by zipper noises and postmarks. By the way, air smelled different in the hours before dawn. She was good at arriving at exactly the minute the doc wanted her to, because the doc always did. She ran the same line 3 nights a week, crossing 3 counties and slipping through 2 small towns that existed mainly to be passed through by somebody else. Her rig was a calm place, a sun-cracked atlas in the pocket by the door, a paper coffee cup folded into a triangle and wedged in the dash as a good luck charm, a battered radio tuned half the time to a playlist and half to AM for travelers' advisories. On that stretch, somewhere between the river and the flat that people call prairie, even when it's lined with factory roofs, brown signs on posts said tune him 1,630 for traveler info. She did, because there are some instructions that feel like courtesy rather than order. The station came in with the warm, fuzzy sound of not quite being on frequency. A woman's voice, not young, not old. The way municipal voices always sound because cities and counties don't have ages, said, "This is the Ravensbridge Traveler Information Service. Watch for overnight lane closures at mile 26. It was the kind of information that cleans your mind the way a list does. Iris left it there at low volume. A companion with good boundaries. Past midnight, rain threatened, and then thought better of it. The pavement wore the promise of damp, a darkening here and there. She had made good time. She liked this. The post office liked this. And then the sign that no one likes appeared, orange and temporary, reflective under light like a beetle's shell. Truck, detour. An arrow to the right sent heavy vehicles off the state route and into streets, meant for the weight of morning school runs and delivery vans. She slowed, because in small towns you always slow, and steered toward the arrow's insistence. It was the hour when small towns hold their breath. Houses made quilts out of porch light and uncurtained windows. The courthouse at the square had a clock stuck at a polite minute that did not correspond to anything. Banners across the street announced an arts fair that would arrive in daylight. Names of sponsors printed neatly. Nobody to read them yet. The detour signs were generous with arrows. They kept saying, in effect, "We know this is an annoyance. We're doing our best. Here's another arrow, bless you." She followed a route that made sense while she was in it. Left around the square to let the center stay pretty. Right past the library, with its lit fish tank sitting like a small ocean after hours. Left again where the truck route sign with a picture of a little tractor trailer promised she hadn't been forgotten. She let the turns take her, felt the trailer follow like a dancer who trusts the hand at her back. Through it all, the municipal voice on AM 1,630, updated with little bits of useful fact. Avoid Maple due to resurfacing. Please use numbered avenues for eastbound travel. Street sweeping scheduled for 3 a.m. Park accordingly. She smiled at that because there was no one to park except her. She lifted 3 fingers off the wheel in a little throwaway salute to a town that tried. She kept moving. There comes a moment in a detour where you expect to see a sign reading "End Detour," a little reassurance that the world wants you back on your way. Instead, Iris saw the front of a diner she had just passed, same "Open 6 to 2" sign. Same handwritten note taped in the window about banana pancakes tomorrow. Same ceramic hen in the corner. That could happen if a street curved and reintroduced you to your own past. It got her attention anyway. She checked her mirrors to see if the tail remembered more than the head. The trailer glowed its innocent white. The road behind was empty except for a single cat cutting across with the invincible confidence of cats. She turned right where the arrow said. The municipal station said, "Please observe truck curfew downtown. Use 2nd Avenue to rejoin bypass." The word curfew landed oddly in her ear. That was for noise or fireworks. Not for 18 wheels on empty streets, where even wind seemed off-duty. She wanted the bypass back. She wanted beige concrete and a row of reflectors. She wanted to give this town back to itself. The light at the next intersection flipped green as she approached. The crosswalk chirper on the pole made the steady, metronome click that tells human feet when to be brave. No pedestrians came. She drove through at the respectable speed of someone who refuses to be the problem on someone else's front lawn. The light after that went green early too. Its timing so generous. It felt like intention. A 3rd time past the diner. This time, the ceramic hen's head seemed turned a degree, but it had probably always been that way. She says it like that when she tells it, because you can push a detail too hard, and then it stops belonging to the story. On the radio, the municipal voice said, "Please avoid Maple." Iris glanced up at the next sign she saw. Maple. The arrow under it pointed left, the orange detour propped on sawhorses, obedient in the way temporary things are. She turned right instead, toward Elm. The numbers on the houses stepped like a child learning to count. She preferred numbered roads in small towns. 2nd Avenue, 3rd Avenue, because they promised order. Trees wear moods. Numbers make peace. The road brought her past the courthouse again. Same clock. The municipal voice said, "Numbered avenues are preferred for through travel." It was as if the station had caught the thought before she had completely formed it. The way a friend can sometimes complete a sentence for you and be right. She tuned the knob a twitch, expecting static or some slogan to roll in. The words remained. She followed 2nd Avenue as instructed. It carried her to a blinking school zone sign in front of a 1-story brick building, low and kind. The kind that collects cheers and lost mittens and teacher voices. The sign's amber bulbs blinked 20 mph when flashing at 3 in the morning, an anachronism with a pleasant face. Iris dropped to 20 without being told. She would have, even without the sign. AM 1630 said, "If you need to pause, do so at the school sign." The town rests easiest then. It wasn't a rule she had heard before. She smiled because the phrasing was soft and odd, and because kindness has touched her in stranger ways. She eased up at the curb by the school, set her brake gently, and watched her own hazard lights throw polite pulses across empty asphalt. The reefer hum was not her problem tonight. The mail sat quiet behind her like a secret told to a trustworthy person. Just sitting changed the feeling of the place a little. The street made the sound streets make when they aren't being asked for anything, the tiny ticks and breaths of materials deciding how they want to be in the air. A porch 2 houses down had a glider on it. It rocked once in the wind or against no wind. A dog barked once and then, as if someone inside had put a hand on its head and said, "Hush," stopped. The radio whispered, "Thank you," in the municipal voice's cadence, and then, "Resume when ready. Follow the white pelican symbols to bypass." Iris knew towns that used geese or cows or fruit on banners to make themselves legible to people passing through. She didn't remember any pelican signs on the way in, but she didn't remember the diner's ceramic hen, either. She released the brake, winked her hazards twice as a thank you to no one she would have to hear back from, and rolled. At the next intersection, there was a small square sign on the pole at eye height. The kind of small municipal sign you never notice, unless someone has drawn a smiley face on it. A white pelican in profile pointed its beak toward the right. She followed. A block later, another pelican, this one with its beak left. The municipal voice did not repeat itself. It sat with her in the cab, like a companion not looking out the window on purpose. She liked that attitude in a radio. She passed the diner a fourth time, or it might have been just the twin of the first on a different street. The open 6-2 sign was intact. The note about banana pancakes had been replaced with a note about cherry pie today. She felt the pleasant absurdity of knowing she could name nothing exactly. It did not make her heart speed. When she reached Maple, as a test, she looked straight down it. The street lamps on Maple were an old kind, the kind that hang on long arms and pool yellow light beneath themselves. In 3 pools of light, something that looked like figments of rain that hadn't arrived moved with intention. The trees leaned into the street, with a social intelligence that numbers didn't have. She kept to second because numbers got you home. The pelicans were a breadcrumb trail done in municipal iconography. She followed them past a sandwich shop with chalk art on a board that was too good to be done for profit alone. Past a veterinary sign with a phone number that repeated a memorable digit too many times to be accidental. The lights ahead now gave her something new. A red. It held, defiantly, at red. She smiled at its stubbornness. She stopped with gratitude as one should, when given a chance to follow a rule as written. When the crosswalk chirped, it chirped out of order too quick, and then silence, then one, then none. It sounded like a code a child would make up and enforce faithfully. The municipal voice said, "Hold for 2 heartbeats at red, then go, and do not look in the store windows." She held. She did not look in the store windows. She did not need to be told twice. You can invite all sorts of things by looking at your own face where you don't expect it, and none of them belong in a cab filled with legal letters and bubble wrap promises. The light went green. She counted quietly. The way you do when you decide to trust a request. 1, 2. As if her heart were talking to its own rhythm. Then she drove. The pelican sign at the end of the block pointed to a low underpass she had not seen before, one that sliced under the railroad and widened just where it needed to widen for a trailer. A bypass sign sat contentedly on the far side, as if it had always been there and she had been the one late to notice. She took the ramp and let the state route accept her again. The municipal voice said, "Thank you for traveling through Ravensbridge. Good night." The station went to its loop about lane closures and a public service message about how to dispose of leaves. The coffee in her cup holder did that small slosh that means the truck and the road are in agreement. At the next mile marker, she checked the clock and had the oddest small realization. All that detouring had taken 10 minutes by her book. In her body, it felt like longer. Her odometer had added an amount that did not square with the geometry of small-town grids. Math could be wrong when you were tired. Math could be wrong when it was right, and you just didn't want how it felt. She left it be. The next time she took that route, a week later, a trooper had the detour closed down. Work was complete, the bypass open. The municipal sign still told travelers to tune to 1630 AM. She did, because habits help the world keep itself. The same voice read a list of times when the local pool would open for lap swim. She smiled at the idea of a pool in a town that had taught her how to be patient. She rolled on. If there were out loud confirmations later, they came like this. At a truck stop 2 counties over, another male driver with the same color trailer and the same quiet contained inside his day said, "You ever catch Ravensbridge at night?" Iris said, "They've got pelicans." He said, "Use numbers, not trees." And that was the end of it. Neither of them said that at the school sign the amber light feels like an eye closing and opening in a way that comforts you. Neither of them said that if you look in the diner window when you shouldn't, you might see a person turning a ceramic hen to face out, hand on it like a blessing. On a later run, just to see what she'd captured, Iris pulled the dashcam footage. The camera had a way of making the world look small and bright and flat. It recorded what it could. The file names the camera gave 3 short clips on its own made her stop a second, not alarmed, just still. Second AV-ONI. Second AV2. Second AV2. The device never labeled clips that way. It labeled by numbers and dates. It had decided not to help exactly, but to categorize on her behalf. She laughed because sometimes when a thing is kind to you, you laugh. She saved the clips to the cloud in a folder she named simply Town. She didn't tell anyone about that name. Once, in daylight, she took the detour on purpose, just to see the streets awake. Children walked to school in pairs. A crossing guard lifted a hand, and she lifted hers, and they shared professional respect. The diner was open and people ate eggs. There were no pelicans on the poles. Maple looked perfectly innocent, its trees not leaning across so much as reaching for each other like neighbors. The courthouse clock said exactly what everyone's phone said it said. The municipal station gave the time and the weather and a reminder about a town hall meeting to discuss the fireworks display for the 4th. The world had gone back to daytime rules. She let it. When she told the story later, if she ever did, she told it as a useful thing. The way you tell someone how to find the cheapest diesel on a given chain, or which document to ask for if you want to get loaded straight. She said there was a town that liked courtesy. She said numbered avenues are easier than trees. She said if you hear a kind voice on 1,630, listen to it. She said if all the lights go green too eagerly, let one red have its dignity, and the road will be better for you than it was. She said none of it with spook to it. She said all of it as if she were reading a list someone had written on a folded piece of paper and tucked beneath a rubber band on the visor where you keep true things. And if a new driver asked her if she'd ever been trapped, she would shake her head. Not trapped, she'd say. Kept a minute. There's a difference. Then she'd turn the radio low and aim for the bypass. Because the bypass loves you when you let it. And the town sleeps best when you remember to wave to the school sign on your way past. Story number 5. They say it happens on the river that holds 2 states apart. The wide brown one that eats barges and returns them on its own schedule. A handful of county ferries still muscle trucks across after midnight when the main span is closed for repairs or just because night has its own rules. The drivers who use them do so out of respect as much as convenience. They know what water can do to a timeline. Reed had glass on. Pallets of empty bottles shrink-wrapped tight, a polite, hollow weight that rattled only if you did something wrong. He liked halls like that. They made him careful in a way that pleased him. His run called for a bridge crossing he'd made 100 times, a beige stripe over black water, with a wind that pointed out your sloppiness if you let it. That night the signs flashed bridge closed 11 p.m., 4 a.m., with an arrow to ferry this exit for permitted loads. The GPS made a disapproving sound. He smiled at the GPS because it did not know the ferry. He took the exit. The terminal sat in a scoop of bank under a row of cottonwoods, their leaves holding the day's last warmth a few feet longer than the rest of the world. A small office with a window glowed out onto a lot lined with yellow paint that stopped politely at the water's edge. Beyond, the river was a muscle in the dark. A wooden sign, hand-lettered and then weathered, until the words had their own patience, read, "Last crossing on the hour. No horns on approach. Headlights to parking lamps. Remain with vehicle. Mind the bell." There were 3 rigs ahead. One was a dump with a tarp pulled over stone, one a flat with steel coils lashed like sleeping seals, and one an old cabover that looked like it had been rescued from a photograph and taught the modern road by someone kind. The cabover's company name was painted in a script he hadn't seen in years. Its marker lights glowed orange the way bulbs glow when they are glass on filament, not diodes. A man with a knit cap and a safety vest stepped out from the office when the ferry drew alongside the slip. He didn't blow a whistle. He lifted his arm and circled a hand in a signal older than road signs. He pointed to the flatbed. "First," he called, and his voice carried the way river voices do, not loud, exactly, but wide. "Then dump. Then you, cabover. Box with the glass. You anchor us center. Parking lamps once you're on. Window down 2 fingers. Brake set. Stay in your seat. Don't open your doors on the water." He was not barking. He was reading from a script the river had given him. Reed nodded and eased forward when it was his turn. The ramp groaned a note like a cello, rich and assured. His drives touched the deck and the deck spoke to him through the metal like a floor in an old house, solid, talkative. He followed the painted line the man pointed at with 2 fingers, rolled on until the hand made a flat saw motion. The ferry worker rapped the deck twice with his boot, and then held up a palm. "Stop here." Reed stopped. He set his brake. He dialed his headlights to parking and cracked his window. The air that came in had a smell like rope and fish and distant leaf mold. It was not unpleasant. The worker came along the line of cabs on the driver's side, touching each door lightly with the back of his fingers, as if greeting a row of horses. When he reached Reed, he lifted his chin in a small hello. Up close, his vest had the name of the county stitched in block letters. He had a face that knew rain in all its dialects. "First time at night?" he asked. Not unkind, not fishing, just making sure his rules had the right ear to land in. Reed admitted it was. "Good," the man said, and smiled because some people smile when they're about to tell you how to do a simple thing right. "Here's what you do. Pick that yellow line. Keep your eyes on it until we ring off. We'll give you 1 bell for letting go the ramp, 2 for clear water, 3 for the far side coming up. If you hear more than that, that's the river being opinionated. You don't answer it. Don't touch your horn. Don't flash. If you feel us lean, you'll want to look. Don't. Let your eyes have one job. We like our weight, wear it island." A voice came from the little speaker high on the ferry's cabin. It was a woman's voice this time, the kind of steady they hire for school crossings and stop-and-go pilot cars. "All right, friends, we're going to nose out. Parking lamps only. Please don't stand. We're counting you. Don't make us have to count twice." The words would have been a joke in any other place. Here, they sounded like instruction in how to keep a room calm when you have a lot of candles and 1 match left. The first bell sounded. It was not a gong. It was not a ship's theatrics. It was a small brass bell struck with certainty. The ramp lifted, and the boat gave a small, shoulders-back shrug. Reed shifted his heel to find a comfortable place on the mat and let his hands relax because hands are bad at not doing. The deck hummed. The hum was steady, like a generator old enough to be interesting. The river moved beneath in a way that felt like someone turning a page you haven't finished yet. He watched the yellow line. It ran ahead of his bumper, a little left of center, a road that asked for trust the same as any. His side window fed him the smell of water and a breath that came up from the surface with the temperature of a basement. He could have looked to starboard at the dark that only moves when you consider not looking at it, but the man had asked him not to, and he liked the feeling of doing exactly as asked when the ask was clear. At 2 bells, a shift took place you could measure with a teacup. The air pressure under the cab changed a hair. The glass behind him trembled lightly the way it will when a freight elevator starts to take you up and your bones try to decide whether to accept it. Ahead, in the corner of his windshield, a pair of range lights set on the far bank arranged themselves into a single vertical when the pilot brought the nose into the channel white over white, an old river trick to tell you are pointed in a way the math will reward. For a breath, the lights went out of line. Then the ferry corrected, and the 2 became 1 again. Reed found the lining up beautiful, without the need to say so. A little way to his left, the cab-over's window was down the recommended 2 fingers. He could see the driver's hand on the wheel, steady. Wedding band dull in the ferry light. The cab over there had a small sticker low on the door from a company that had folded before Reed took his CDL. He had seen pictures of such trucks in books that smelled like old paper and coffee. He didn't mind that fact. The world is big. It lets things cross where they want to sometimes. Halfway out, the hum dulled, and for 3 seconds there was a hush that did not belong to the boat or the night or the men on it. It was the sound you get in your ears when you drive out from under a line of high-tension wires, pressure without noise, a thoughtful vacuum. His chest noticed. He breathed through it. The hush set down, and the hum turned itself back on with the humility of a machine that does not think itself the center of any narrative. On the speaker, the calm voice read out a list like grocery items. Blue lane sitting pretty. Center, thank you. Red lane, easy on that brake. Good. 5 over 8. We'll count it. It could have been about the deck. It could have been about something older. The flatbed driver on Reed's right lifted 2 fingers off his wheel toward the worker. A salute without urgency. The worker, standing at the rail with 1 foot on the coaming and his hands in his vest pockets, returned the gesture like a man tipping his hat to a tired horse. The dump truck's tarp hummed. Somewhere a chain took up slack and decided to remember its job. Reed's phone screen, face down on the passenger seat, made the tiny chime it made when it lost service. It hadn't had much service before. It was a sound that felt more like a habit than an alert. His dash clock rolled its minute, and then rolled it again back to what it had been. He smiled because he had enough nights in him to let time be unhelpful in that way, without needing to wrestle it into a chair. 3 bells. The far bank grew out of the dark in pieces. A tree. The shine off a sign. A slice of gravel. A low concrete wall. The deck sighed. A long exhale of something done right. "Stay put," the speaker said, kindly. "We're going to kiss that ramp soft. Don't help us by guessing." The boat nosed in. The bump was not a bump so much as two things making room for each other's opinion. The ramp came down with a noise like a big book closed carefully. The worker walked the line again, touching doors with the back of his fingers, making sure the night didn't ask more of anyone than the plan did. He stopped by Reed's step and tilted his head toward the far shore, like a person pointing at a thing that has done him a favor. "You did fine," he said. "Center Lane always does fine." His voice softened as if he were about to say something his granddad had told him. "If you hear the bell again when you're halfway up the ramp, don't look back. That's for the river. You go forward and give the hill your attention. We'll see you on your way." The flatbed rolled, then the dump. The cabover's driver leaned like a person who had done this once in another decade and found it similar enough to count. When it was Reed's turn, he eased up the ramp with the feeling of lifting a heavy pot off the stove, careful, even, committed. He kept his headlights at parking until his bumper matched the sign that said, in reflective white, "Headlights now." He clicked them on. The hillside beyond shone up slope, gravel dotted with reflectors that looked like eyes because all reflectors do if you want them to. He did not make anything out of them they did not offer. At the top was a booth with a window. A woman inside with a thermos and a book took his card and then returned it with a handwritten receipt the color of library paste. It said County Ferry in block letters, and a line of numbers below for his ledger. In one corner, in pencil, someone had written a courteous S, which could have been for the lane he'd anchored or a quiet letter the ferry wrote to itself. "You made it just on the hour," she said. "Be advised, the main span's inspectors take their time with that kind of crosswind. If you run back before 4, you might be seeing us again." "I won't complain," he said, because he wouldn't. She smiled and gave him the kind of salute you give a person you'll never see again, and will remember fondly anyway. At the big lot a mile from the river where highway met highway, Reed pulled into an empty rectangle and took a breath with the truck quiet. He did not feel particularly spooked. He felt included. He climbed down and walked around to look at his straps the way you do when a crossing has used you as a piece of a larger equation. Everything held. On the bottom rail of his trailer's door, someone had chalked a tidy check mark not there earlier. It would wash off first rain. He liked the idea of a mark that wasn't his that had agreed with him. He rolled the rest of the night the way you roll after something steady awake in a useful way. Not jittered, not relieved, as if something had put its hand between his shoulder blades a moment and said, "Good." He delivered his pallets of glass to a low building that swallowed them with grateful forklifts. On his way out, he looked at the river one more time, only because the highway did. Later, weeks later, with a cup of coffee that had decided to be coffee after resisting for a while, he told a driver in a lot outside a toasted sandwich place about the ferry. The other man nodded with the generosity of someone who had kept the same rules and wanted to see them adopted. "Yellow line only," the man said. "Yellow line only," Reed agreed. "Don't look starboard at 2 bells," the man added. "Didn't," Reed said. "And if you hear more bells than you were promised." "Not mine," Reed finished. They nodded like two people whose night jobs occasionally asked them to go onto water. Someone at the next table asked what county they were talking about, as if the answer would be a useful thing to sell for fuel points. Neither of them named it. It wasn't secrecy. It was respect. You can say too much, and then the person listening tries to make your road perform for them. The river doesn't do performances. It does crossings. Once, on a different route months later, Reed happened upon the main bridge open again and lit like a wedding cake, traffic flowing across it like something in a time-lapse. He took it because that was the job, because you don't take the long way out of romance when the paper tells you to be practical. He looked downriver and saw the square shape of the ferry moving along its old wire like a careful insect. His hands did the smallest echo of the old count on the wheel, 1, 2, 3, and then let the numbers go because there was nothing to count to. Drivers who live in nights collect small instructions like talismans. Some of them are written in the big black font on signs. Some are told in doorways with coffee steam crossing words. Some come from speakers that sound like wind. The ferry's instructions weren't about superstition. They were about not confusing yourself with what's none of your business. Your job was the yellow line. The river had its job. Together, if each stayed generous, you got from one side to the other without making a story about it. But sometimes it is a story anyway. If only because something rang a bell at the right time, and you sat very still in a place that moves, and you did what a person told you, and it worked. If that isn't worth telling on a quiet night between mile markers, it's hard to say what island. Story number 6. They tell this one about a parcel line haul driver named Avery, who preferred the late leg that stitched 2 distribution centers together across farm country, the kind of night where the biggest shape on the horizon was a grain elevator, and the brightest dots were radio towers blinking their steady red therapy into the dark. He liked the discipline of it. Scan the mirrors, mind the corners, keep the box gentle for whatever 100,000 addresses had asked for that day. He ran a clean cab. He kept a small flashlight in the door pocket that clicked on with the soft authority of a good tool. He did not hurry his coffee. He did not borrow trouble. The night in question was clear enough to make him grateful. No wind to shove at the trailer. No wet to argue with his tires. The highway out there was mostly a suggestion. A 2-lane with shoulders that kept their secrets, and a dashed center line that remembered paint in places and guessed in others. Farmhouses were their own constellations. One window, then another, separated by fields that had been combed to stubble by the year that had just decided to leave. He had the whole machine arranged the way he liked it. A thermos living at the base of the passenger seat, a coil of spare bungees that behaved themselves, a map of the county in case his phone went romantic and decided not to help. There was a crossing on that route everybody knew. It sat a mile east of a town with a water tower painted to look like a watermelon, the skin green with lighter green stripes. The crossing was clean, the arms went up and down without drama, the bells knew their job. It was on a main line, and the grain stacks and intermodals and oil trains came as they pleased and stretched their presence across however many minutes the crew and dispatch had decided they would take. Most nights Avery rolled through with the arms resting up and the bells asleep, and all he saw was the silver bars of the rails shining like small rivers where the roadway thought roads should own everything. This night the arms went down while he was still half a quarter mile out. He eased to a stop like a person sitting into a chair at a friend's table. The bells began their fast declarative chime. The red lights at the crossbucks threw little pulses of punctuation against his hood. He set his brake and let the moment make its small room. The train announced itself with a low wind of sound far off a kilometer of moving steel being translated into a single villainous hum you can feel in your jaw. Then, in the gate of his windshield, it arrived, sudden in the way large things move. Boxcars with murals painted by patient hands that had probably never seen an ocean, tank cars with numbers that looked like math problems, stacks of containers labeled with names that made you think of places that didn't care about your weather. The trucks under the cars clacked and sang the way they should. A syncopation as fine as a clock if you like your clocks to be loud and truthful. He took his hand off the shifter and rested it palm up against his thigh. He liked the sound of trains. He knew men who'd worked them, knew the word for the hook that catches the wind on a boxcar roof even though no one used it anymore. If you waited often enough at crossings, you learned to keep your mind simple. Look at one spot on the moving wall and let it take you. Don't count. You make yourself a promise not to count because counting makes your mind greedy, and time has its own diet. He kept his eyes soft and set them on the seam between 2 panels of corrugated steel on a passing container. Minutes do a funny treadmill thing at a crossing. They stack themselves differently, each one shorter or longer, to fit the history of your patience. He glanced at his dash clock without really wanting to. It offered him 2. 13 in polite numbers and then offered him 2. 13 again when his eye returned 5 cars later. And then, as if to be helpful, it did that a 3rd time. He checked the phone fixed in its cradle. The phone said 2. 13, and looked smug. He smiled because sometimes electronics agree with each other in ways that make you forgive them everything they ever did to annoy you. The train kept its empire. He picked a new point on a different container where the paint had peeled to the exact outline of a mitten. He looked at that. He did not count. He listened. Beyond the bells and the wheels, there was a second sound from the train's belly, higher and thinner, like a pencil drawn across paper under a stack of other papers. He had heard that before at different crossings, and it never meant anything but steel talking to steel. The trouble with nights is your mind can promote any sound to officer class if it's given the chance. Headlights came up in his driver's mirror, a pickup easing in with sleepy politeness. It stopped a tractor length back, and then rolled forward just enough that he could see two people in the cab, a hat on the passenger and the driver leaning forward a touch like locals do when they are not impatient yet but will be in 20 minutes. Another set of lights arrived on the opposite side of the crossing, a car that bounced in its suspension like the springs had been working too long for too little gratitude. The bells changed, not the rhythm, the tone. They took one step lower down the scale and kept going, like a singer choosing a different key mid-song and acting like that had been the plan. Avery looked at them, because you always look at the thing you tell yourself not to look at. The glass domes over the bulbs looked exactly as they had. He could see gnats batting at their heat even now in the cold. The sound just felt older. He told himself sound doesn't have birthdays. He set his fingers along the bottom of the wheel and let his eye find that mitten shape again. The train slowed. It did not feel like slowing as much as it felt like deciding. The clacks spread out in time so you could hear the space between notes. The last of a stack passed and revealed a cut of Autorack's tall cars with metal grills like wardrobes trying to hide in a field. It was an honest way to lose minutes. He relaxed into it. He made a list in his head of everything that needed doing at the next dock in the order that would make an unloader happiest. He thought about the thermos and the way coffee under a lid keeps its little universe going. The train stopped. When a train stops across you, there is etiquette. There are honks in some towns, exhortations in others. Here, the people in the pickup behind him did not honk. The car across the way did not dart around the arm. The bells kept their job with professional detachment. After a long 10 count, the slack ran through the cars, and the whole string shuddered like a body remembering something. The train started again, only it started the other way. Avery breathed out, then back in, and smiled, because there was nothing to be done but admire a decision that didn't worry about you. He felt the small pull of irritation and set it down. Backing trains happen. Yard limits get fuzzy in the dark. He kept his eyes easy and his mouth shut. Behind him, the pickup's driver stepped out and leaned against the hood. Arms crossed. Not in anger, but in a kind of companionable resignation. He lifted a hand in a shrug, and Avery returned it. They were now a room with bells and a moving wall and two men being noble about it. What happened next he told with care the few times he told it, because there was nothing in it to scare a person, and yet he didn't like jokes made around it. The string of autoracks gave way to a few tank cars so clean they looked rinsed. Between two of those, in the narrow throat of gap that appears sometimes where couplers do their clumsy ballet, there was a blue glow. Not bright, not theatrical. The sort of blue you see when you cup your hands around your phone at 3 in the morning, the color of late laundry room fluorescence. It lay on the coupler, like a thought. He knew about blue flags from yard stories. Blue means men at work. Don't move me, don't touch anything. The blue he saw did not look like a flag or a lantern. It looked like something considering being a shape, and then deciding it would rather be light. The pickup driver saw it too. Avery could tell by the way the man's head tilted and stopped. The bells went on. The blue Saturday, when the slack came again, a conversation of steel on steel, the blue intensified for a second and then softened. The car on the far side of the coupler had a stencil on it with a number that would be a number on any day. Tonight the number looked like a story trying not to be told. Avery checked his clock and then, angrily at himself, stopped doing that. He checked instead the shape of his own hand against the wheel. The edges of it were the edges of it. He cracked his window to lower the temperature in his cab, because sometimes a little cold will do for your sense what logic refuses to. Air came in that smelled like rust and cold water. He put the window back up 2 fingers, because he liked the feel of the small click it makes when rubber seals find each other. The municipal in-town AM he always tuned to for roadwork notices wasn't there. He was far enough out that it became a murmur. The CB had been quiet. He left them that way. Someone might have said, "What's the holdup on Channel 19?" And then someone might have made a joke to keep themselves awake. And then he would have had to listen to strangers try to help with the thing they couldn't. He preferred the room he had. The blue went out. The bells, which had been doing their alternate key song, took a breath you could hear and returned to their usual tone. The train changed its mind again. It slid forward, 100,000 expressions in steel getting on with it. The autoracks came back, then containers again with their brand names, then boxcars with older paint. At the edge of the crossing arms sweep, Avery saw the telltale of a caboose, a cupola, red, the kind you don't see except on maintenance moves, a museum piece doing modern work. He felt like he was seeing a deer in a parking garage. Entirely possible, unfair to the world, and beautiful. Something knocked on his driver's side door, but no one was there. It was not a knuckle. It was the sound a cold door makes when warm air leaves it, the blip of pressure equalizing. He wanted it to be that, so it was. The pickup driver had sat back down in his cab. The car across had turned its engine off and on again, a habit every driver has when they are failing to manipulate time properly. The last car of the train a little flat with a short safety railing passed, and the bells stopped. The arms rose like careful waltzers taking off their hats. Avery waited the extra heartbeat he always waited, and then rolled. He looked left and right because he always did. Even when the world has just proven it's paying attention. The rails looked like rails again, no longer like rules. He crossed in low, the tractor's suspension telling him the truth about the seam between road and railroad. On the far side, the pickup driver flashed his headlights twice, like a person concluding a church service. Avery tapped his hazards twice in return without thinking. He made the mile through the center of the sleeping town. The Watermelon Water Tower looked like someone had put a toy on the world to keep it from being scary. The downtown had a row of mannequins in a window that looked like they all knew an answer and were never going to tell. The clock on the bank said 2:14. He laughed quietly because at some point clocks had recommitted to the concept of minutes. At the truck stop beyond, a small one that sold more fishing tackle than fuel, he pulled in to check his straps and put a face to the pickup driver's wave in case they needed to complain about trains at each other. The pickup nosed into a slot, and the other driver got out. Up close, he was younger than Avery expected, because voices from trucks always make people 35 in your head. He had the round cap of someone who still liked to bring a hat home from a feed store, because the number stitched on the side meant something to him. "You see the blue?" the man asked without hello. "Yeah," Avery said. "I didn't want to be the one to say it." The man nodded. "Happens once in a while when they've got crews on the siding and they've been babysitting that grade too long. Or so my uncle says." He ran that line until his knees told him to run something else. He picked at the edge of a fingernail like he was shy, and then decided not to be. "I always wait for the arm to go all the way up. I don't care how late I am." "Me too," Avery said, and meant it the way he meant most simple things. He poured himself a finger of coffee and offered the thermos. The man shook his head. "You'll make your time," the man said, like a benediction. "Don't count 'em, that's the trick." "I didn't," Avery said, and then, because honesty can be polite and embarrassing at the same time, "I almost did." "Yeah," the man said. "Me too." They stood a second, not saying much, and let the semis and the refrigerators and the little refrigerated glass door of the drink cooler instruct the room on what noise should be. The TV over the counter showed a map with a bright red sweep of weather that was not theirs. The clerk rearranged novelty keychains on a display in a thoughtless, contented loop. When Avery got back on the road, nothing demanded he make a story out of the crossing. The fields were still fields. The sky heaved up a small scatter of stars that looked like someone had shaken salt over velvet and found restraint. The river he would cross later did its river work. He arrived at the dock at the receiving end of things and backed into 4 like he'd been born knowing the geometry. The unloader had a clip-on light that made the inside of his trailer look like a stage where nothing dramatic would ever happen, and be proud of it. If he spoke of it later, he left out any tone of haunting. He said he had been kept at a crossing by a very long train, that the bells dropped low for a minute as if they were tired of their own song, and that he saw a little blue where a coupler made a mouth of steel. He would say that maybe a worker was up ahead setting a flag, and maybe the light traveled because so did everything else out there that night. If a new driver asked him how long he was stopped, he would say, "Long enough to learn not to look for the end, and take a sip of coffee, and watch the line of taillights on the interstate flow like something someone remembered to plug in." Sometimes the road tells you to keep your eyes on one spot while a lot of motion makes promises it doesn't have to keep. Sometimes a train changes its mind. Sometimes a blue that doesn't belong to any bulb you can find will sit politely on a piece of steel and then go where it needs to. The lesson, if there had to be one, was the same one his father had taught him backing a pickup toward a trailer when he was too young to see over the dash properly. Don't correct. Let the thing come to you. The bell will ring in the key it was meant to. The arm will rise. You breathe. You go. Story number 7. They tell this one about a milk hauler named Sasha, who ran the turnpike at night. Stainless tanker behind her like a moon caught on the hitch. Food grade. No chemicals. No fumes. Just the faint, clean smell of dairy that lingers even after a CIP wash has done its long miracle. She liked those runs, the quiet lanes, the long, even hills, the way the polished barrel behind her gathered whatever light there was and carried it along without complaint. She had the route by heart, on at the west gate, off near dawn at the processor where steam curled up from stacks into a sky, still thinking about stars. The turnpike had gone cashless years ago. Cameras read plates, transponders chirped, and booths had been turned into little museums of their own architecture. But that week, construction signs sprouted like caution-colored flowers, and a message board over her ramp said, in polite uppercase, "Trucks use manual toll lane 3. She eased off the merge, blinkers on, and followed the drum barrel corridor toward a glass booth lit warm as a kitchen. It looked like time had kept a corner for itself there. Incandescent bulbs inside made the booth glow a shade not found in LEDs. A fan perched on a metal filing cabinet turned its head the way a bird watches a yard. The man inside wore a uniform she remembered from old photographs in a rest area hallway. Dark shirt, cap with a crest, name stitched in a square in a script that had fallen out of fashion. "Henry," the square said. He slid the window, and the small square of night pressed close, curious. "Evening," he said, voice neither loud nor soft, only the right size for the space between cab and booth. "Truck class 5, you're good. Take a ticket." He fed a slip into a punch, and the machine made a satisfying clack, imprinting an entry gate and a time with those clean, tattoo-like letters machines used to have. Sasha took the ticket. It had weight, a card with a grid of interchanges and prices and tiny boxes to be marked. It looked like something meant to be kept in a glove box with maps. "Didn't think you all still did these," she said, meaning it as a kindness. He smiled like a man pleased that someone recognized the craft of a thing. "Maintenance has the gantries sleeping. We do it the old way when the wires take their nap. Don't let this spook you, no one's checking you against the clock." He leaned slightly, as if sharing an unimportant secret. "Service plaza at mile 104 has bay 5 roped. Floor scrubbers. Use bay 7 if you need a sit. And if your dome light flickers after Shiloh overpass, ignore it." Sensor burp. They said it wrong when they changed the ballast. She laughed, because the specificity charmed her. "Got it. Thanks. Watch your mirrors at mile 92, he added, businesslike again. "Road paint's fresh. Drivers try to make new lanes. Don't let them. Safe run." He slid the window with a small, soft thunk, and the fan went on telling a story to an empty room. She eased forward. In her mirror, the booth shrank, then took its place among the furniture of the night. The turnpike is a different creature between midnight and 4. The big, radiant signs feel like lullabies. The light standards hold their pools like small stages with nobody performing on them. Sasha found her groove, hands light on the wheel, that rhythm between lanes where the tires sing a note that says, "You've done this enough to be trusted." The tanker's baffles hushed the slosh, turning milk into a thing that sat still out of courtesy. At Shiloh Overpass, a low concrete span, with a chain-link cage that kept drop things from meeting windshields, the dome light above her shoulder blinked once. Not a strobe. Not a warning. Just a blink, as if it had considered turning on and thought better of it. She smiled to herself, not too much, and set a finger on the map clip as if that were a way to say thank you to a stranger doing his job. The service plaza at mile 104 rose out of the median like a small town that only opens at night. Trucks slid in with the grace of large things when they are finally permitted to go slow. Bay 5 had cones. A yellow scrubber did polite circles, its driver an older woman in headphones, the machine making the contented whisper of brushes who know their work. Sasha took Bay 7 because she had been told to, and because it was open, and because sometimes the order of the world depends on tiny decisions you can get right. Inside, the lights had the color of daylight imagined by a committee. The coffee was the sort that tastes of paper cups until you love it for its persistence. On a wall past the vending machines hung a black and white photograph in a frame, a line of toll collectors in a row, their caps at the same tilt as their smiles. A brass plate under the glass had names. The second from the left read Henry C., 35 years. He could have been the man in the booth, minus the years the picture intended to hide. The cashier rang up a bottle of water and a pack of gum that pretended to be for her, and was really for the unloader's pocket later. "Lore guys keep roping 5, she said conversationally. Because people talk in places like that, as if the room itself appreciates the noise. Bay 7's your friend tonight. Seems to be, Sasha said, and smiled because it was true in a way she couldn't have explained to anyone who thought coffee at 2 a.m. was optional. Outside, a handful of swallow silhouettes ghosted the rafters. The warmer air under the canopy tricked them into staying a little longer for summer than the calendar allowed. She climbed back into her cab. The ticket card leaned along the cluster of switches like a small rectangle of permission. She set it under the rubber lip by the attach and eased back into the dark. Past mile 92, she watched the paint in her mirrors not out of fear, just because someone had planted the thought, and it gave her eyes a task. Fresh white stood brighter. A car behind her tried to draft the shoulder around a set of barrels, and then decided not to, its driver's better self taking the wheel for a mile. The turnpike rolled. She thought about the processor's loading dock and the man there who always wore the same cap in winter and summer. She thought about the hiss the plant's steam makes just before dawn when the night lets go, and the day doesn't want it yet. Through it all, the paper ticket felt like a living thing in the cab. Not spooky, just present. Every time her eye flicked to it, she had the sense of navigating by something she could hold in her hand, instead of a satellite far away being polite about helping. Her ELD blinked in its corner. Mile markers ticked like polite metronomes. The tanker's polished flank reflected whatever insisted on existing cat's eyes. A far-off red tower light, her own running lamps pacing. At the exit for her processor, another sign had taken up temporary residence over the lanes. Tolling offline. Use cache lanes. Open 1. 2. The arrow over lane 2 glowed a soft green that always looked shy compared to red. The booths ahead looked upgraded newer glass, LED panels offering numbers, the architecture the same bones dressed differently. She pulled into lane 2 and rolled her window. The attendant wore a polo shirt with the turnpike's newer logo. Behind him, 2 large flat screens showed streams of car pictures and plate numbers sliding into their categories. He reached for a ticket and paused when he saw she already had one. His face did the micro-shift of a person realizing they just received a story instead of a thing. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. Not aggressive, just curious like a person who collects mismatched bolts in a coffee can and knows which lawnmower each fits. "At Westgate," Sasha said. "Manual lane. Guy named Henry." The attendant looked past her shoulder at nothing, which is where people tend to look when their memory gets tapped on the shoulder. He turned and said, "Terry?" to the open doorway behind him, the word carrying the weight of, "Please come see something that will make both of us feel away." A supervisor appeared, older, jacket with reflective piping zipped against a draft that didn't exist in the booth. His eyes took in the card. His mouth didn't do anything dramatic. He ran a thumb along the top edge of the ticket where the punch had set the time and place. He slid it toward himself, then back, like someone testing a coin on a counter to hear if it rings the way it should. "We haven't punched these since the gantries came in," he said finally. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact set on the counter to see how it behaved. Westgate manuals unmanned overnight when construction is outside. "What lane?" 3, Sasha said. "He told me not to take Bay 5 at 104. The supervisor's mouth did a small, silent, "Oh," that meant the world had given him exactly the right amount of surprise. He turned and pointed with his chin toward the wall. A framed photograph hung next to a bulletin board announcing CPR classes and a chili cook-off. The same black and white shot from the plaza, but this one had a second plaque beneath it, newer. "In memory of Henry C., 39 years at Westgate, 1968, 2007. He loved good coffee and straight lines. We keep that up because the old-timers like to see their own faces when they come by," the supervisor said. "And because it keeps the new ones from thinking they invented lanes." He slid the ticket back to her, with a care that didn't belong to paper. "I can't ring this through any system anyone alive uses," he said, gentle. "But I can tell you your toll's 0 tonight because the lane isn't speaking to the office. And you already did what it would have asked. Keep the card if it makes you feel like you've got a friend. Mind mile 88 on the way back. They're testing the fans in the overdeck there. They'll strobe your dome light again, and you'll think it's you. It isn't." He printed her a receipt anyway, the modern strip with its barcode and its cordial farewell. "Good night from the turnpike," it said, as if the road understood bedtime. Sasha put the old ticket under the lip again and let her hands find their work. The processor's driveway took her off concrete and onto asphalt that felt more like a conversation than a demand. The guard at the gate checked her seal, new zip tie for old, ritual done with respect because milk carries so many people's mornings in it. Inside, hoses with shiny couplings swung like purposeful snakes, and a man in a cap labeled with the plant's initials waved her into 4, with the choreographed flatness of a person who had been on that spot so often, the floor understood his shoes. She slept a few hours in the lot after they bled the barrel and sent her to wash. The tanker sounded different, empty, a different hollow, like a church after everyone has left. When she rolled back out toward the turnpike in the pink that pretends to be sun long before the sun agrees, the world had switched to day rules. The manual lanes at the exit were cones and plastic again. The signs over the ramps had stopped apologizing for anything and gone back to giving commands. She tucked the ticket into the pocket behind her visor. Not a souvenir. Proof of a conversation. Days later, she took the west gate again to see if anything in daylight would confirm what the night had made reasonable. The manual lane stood with its window closed. No fan turning its head. A sticker from the highway authority on the glass said in-person tolling suspended with 2 dates and a QR code. She looked up toward the office over the lanes where the windows made black rectangles in the morning. No faces. The photographs in the service plaza looked the same. Bay 5 was open and dry. The scrubber sat parked under a sign that said, "Keep it moving." She told the story once or twice at a table in the fuel side, or in the glow near the bakery case, where all the donuts look fresher under a fake sunrise. She told it without meanness, without punchline. If someone laughed, it was a friendly sound, not the kind that cuts. If a driver asked for the lane number, she shrugged in the way people do when giving too much precision feels like telling a secret that doesn't belong to you. "Take what the sign says," she would say. If a person in a booth tells you which bay to use, do them the courtesy. If a light blinks over your head for no reason, it might be the road checking on you. You're not the only thing out here working. Once, parked under the overdeck at mile 88 in the middle of a sun, she noticed her dome light click once without cause. She smiled, because sometimes the night shows up in the day like a neighbor with a casserole, not asking to be invited in. She reached up, tapped the lens with one knuckle, and said out loud without raising her voice, "I'm good," the way you assure someone in a doorframe who has already done you a favor. Paper still works, she thought. Roads remember. And the next time a temporary sign sent her toward a manual lane, she rolled her window down and had her good manners ready, because she had learned that kindness delivered through a sliding pane of glass at 2 in the morning can travel miles with you and arrive in places you didn't know would need it. Story number 8. They tell this one about a reefer driver named Yara who ran the coast roads at night. Stainless trailer humming a steady, cold note behind her. The kind that says someone's breakfast is on board and time is respectable but not cruel. She liked that run the long threads of causeway laid over marsh, the low bridges with their nav lights like jewelry, the salt that dried on the mirrors and made little white maps by morning. Her rhythm was simple. Pier to plant, plant back to pier, tide in, tide out. She treated the highway like a dock line always coiled, never kinked. The route took her over a series of drawbridges that had once belonged to fishing towns and now held up a whole swath of logistics in the small hours. Big green signs warned no stopping on draw, and smaller metal ones, older and less pretty, offered a phone number and a radio channel for the bridge tender. At night, the road got the place to itself. The birds folded their opinions and slept on the flats. Channel markers winked their codes 1 syllable, 2 syllables, a pause so the water could remember its lanes. She kept the windows up just enough to hear the world without letting the cold scold her. She carried a handheld in the cab because the causeway asked for it. On that stretch, tender traffic floated somewhere between the CB and Marine VHF, a gray area where help and habit meet. She left the radio on low and scanned, a soft wash of clicks and half conversations, the soprano of a buoy bell, the basso of a distant tug. The first bridge rose out of the marsh with a modest tower and a little house sitting atop it, a square with windows that glowed amber, like something domestic and warm in a place that had no need of domesticity. Flashers began to blink. The striped gates swung down in a slow, practiced arc that would have made sense to a child and an engineer equally. She eased to a stop at the bar and set her brake. The reefer behind her purred and then took a breath and held it. There was a horn sequence, two long and one short, that came from the bridge's guts. The sound you hear whether you want to or not when you're near water, that needs to talk to machines. Eastbound refrigerated with the blue stripe. A voice said on her radio, not loud, not questioning, simply attentive. You're on my mark. Thank you for the full stop. Hold for 3. He didn't identify himself. He didn't have to. Every place has its sound. And this was a bridge tender. Unhurried. Utterly awake. Intimate with switches. Yara thumbed the mic. Holding, she said, because it felt right to be counted, even in the dark. The bridge's deck did a small thing, a settling, a lean that didn't belong to the truck so much as to the iron beneath it deciding which way was up. The lights along the guardrail cut out, then one stayed on, then 2 more came back. A pair of tugboat lights slid into view beneath the structure and took their time getting precise. The water pushed at concrete and was told to wait politely. She sat with her hands quiet in her lap and watched one thing only. The reflector rivet dead ahead on the gate crossarm. A tiny, faithful circle that could offer her nothing but itself. It was enough. In the corner of her eye, down past the rail where marsh meets channel and the channel makes a conversation with the tide, something glowed. Not the harsh LED of a modern work light. Not the lantern of a deckhand. A smear of blue-white light bruised the surface of the water, then gathered itself, then smeared again along the top of a lazy current. It was the kind of light you get when plankton decide to tell you they're alive. It drew about as much attention as a cat stretching on a windowsill. If she had looked straight at it, it would have been less. She did not look straight at it. 2, the tender said, and she realized he was counting, not opening times but moments. The way a person counts breaths for someone in a hospital bed without meaning anything by it other than presence. The deck rose then, split at the crown and tilted, each side making a deliberate bow. The horn sequence repeated, a little softer for reasons that belong to physics. A low barge slid through, a rectangle of dark shouldered by 2 points of white. In the blue light on the water, lines showed, falling in toward one another, faint V-shapes like the arrows on a map that tell you where wind likes to play. She had to admire the idea that water could give you advice and let you pretend you'd had it all along. A car, a dozen lengths behind, laid on a polite honk. The kind locals used to see if rules might decide to bend for them as a favor. The radio offered a different answer. Hold your horses, westbound sedan. Bridge is open. You will not be the first person to learn patience on County 7 at 2:13 in the morning. If it helps, the tide's your friend. Don't make me say it twice. The car fell quiet. Somewhere beyond, a night heron gronked once, unhappy at nothing in particular. Yara breathed the breath that sits lowest in a person, the one you don't notice until a machine asks you to, and settled deeper into the seat, because trucks understand when you do that, and they respond kindly. The bridge's deck came down with the sound of a book closing carefully, respectfully. The lights along the guardrail flickered, and one nonconformist bulb refused the call. The gates did not immediately lift. Yara waited because that was what the sign said, and what the tender would want. The radio clicked once, a human punctuation mark. Not yet, eastbound, he said. Wait for the second short. You're going to think you heard it. You didn't. Don't make them replace the bar. She smiled in spite of herself. There was the oddest suspicion that the tender could see more than she knew he could. But that was part of the game on water and bridge. People watching and being watched for reasons that had nothing to do with surveillance and everything to do with keeping all the pieces where they belonged. The horn came. Long, long, short, short. She waited through that, no motion in the hinges. Then the second short, smaller, like a cousin of a sound. The gates lifted. She folded the brake back with her palm and rolled, slow, like a person who has been handed a fragile thing at the door and wants to respect the hand it came in. On the far side, the tender came back on the radio. Thank you, Blue Stripe, he said, and that was all. The second draw sat 3 miles down, hinged on a lower river where the marsh gave way to boatyards, shapes under tarps, masts like tall alphabet letters imagined by a thoughtful child. The signs leading to it said in plainer words, Bridge lifts on the 12. She checked her dash clock. 2:23. Her mind did that thing where it applies nonsense to facts. Because nonsense loves facts. She did not accelerate. She did not decelerate. She let the road and the clock decide if 2:24 belonged to her. The gates did not drop for the second bridge. They winked their red and went on winking as if thinking about winking were as good as a decision. The radio was quiet. The reefers behind her kept their small breathing to themselves. She drifted along with respect, the kind of slow that is not a problem and not a boast. When the bar finally swung down, it did so with all the authority of a schoolteacher raising a hand for stillness. She stopped. "Lift on the 12, the tender said. A different voice this time, someone who had just started their shift, or someone who had inherited the tone from the first bridge without meaning to. "Hold for the little boat. It does not know it's little." Yara cracked her window, and the smell got better, not worse. It had that clean mineral in it you only get when cold runs under a low sky. She watched raindrops gather on the mirror housing and tie themselves into larger drops, as if practicing for something grander. Under the deck, the light on the water did its small business. Nothing for a camera, everything for a person who lives by markers. A school of baitfish turned all at once 3 feet below the surface and wrote a new alphabet. She minded her view. She did not go fishing for meaning in a place that needed her to be a wall that held still. The lift was quick. The horn offered its pattern. The deck came down, the gates lifted, and traffic did what it knows best, resumed. On the far side, tucked in the gravel by the emergency phone, a cooler sat with its lid secured by a bungee, a handwritten sign taped to it. "For tenders. Thank you." Somebody always forgets a spoon. She liked that someone had underlined always. She didn't look inside. The cooler had its job, and she had hers. Between bridges, the causeway widened, a stretch of road pinned like a ribbon across flat water. The moon came up under its own terms, behind cloud, and then out of it. Her tanker picked up the light and turned it into long curved commas along its side. A set of taillights far ahead pulsed gently as a truck eased through a low dip. The radio clicked once. "Blue stripe," said the first tender again, back on her channel like he'd gone with her all along. "You've got a latch on your passenger swing that wants to be something else. Tap it when you stop for coffee. No hurry." She glanced at the mirror, and, when the angle agreed with her, leaned a little to the right to find the latch's shadow on the reefer door. It did look a hair proud. Not a hazard. A preference. She thumbed the mic. "Appreciate you." "None taken," he said, and signed off with a noise that might have been a breath or a lifetime of radios. The third bridge was where the river turned wider and pretended it being sea. Cargo slips with cranes stood like creatures at rest. Out past them, darkness made its own rules. The gate went down. She stopped in the habit now, occupied without being impatient. The horn offered a code she didn't recognize, 2 longs with a long pause between. She waited for a voice. None came. She sat anyway, because trust is learned in small courses, like piloting. A set of running lights in the channel drew a line under the bridge, then a second behind it, shadowing. The first threw a wake that broke against the piers with a flare of blue. The second threw none at all. It is possible, she thought, to remember wakes wrong. She widened her breath and let the thought do what it wanted without picking at it. The lights passed. The deck came back down. The gates did not lift. "Hold for the second opening," the tender said, back on the radio, as if there had never been any other pattern. "You'll think you're through. The next part is for the barge that talks little and needs a lot." There was a soft chuckle. We all know somebody like that. It was a relief to be treated like a colleague by a voice you'd never see. She stayed in gear. Nearby, a blue heron slept on one leg, head pulled down into itself like a person under a blanket. In the water, the plankton glow turned and turned, following microscopic arguments the tide had with itself. She did not try to translate. The second opening was quick, almost a courtesy. The deck met itself again. The gates rose past the height of her hood, then up and out of her life. She rolled. On her way off, the little house atop the bridge had a momentary brightness, as if somebody in it had moved a lamp. She didn't look directly. She let the lamp be a lamp. She went on. At the plant, steam slid from stacks and then seemed to hang for a second, caught between warm and cold. A guard with a clipboard and a knitted cap wrote her plate number without looking at the letters. He had them by heart. "Four's open," he said. "You look like the only person awake." "Bridge says otherwise," she said, and surprised herself by capitalizing the word in her head. He grinned with professional interest and swung the gate for her, back out on the road before dawn. With the empty reefer sounding like a musical instrument after the orchestra has left, she stopped under a light at a fuel island and tapped the passenger latch the way a person adjusts a picture frame in a hallway. It clicked home like it had been born there. On the inside of her window, in the fog her breath had made, there was a small semicircle clean to the glass, the size of a thumb. She wiped it with her sleeve, and the arc smeared, then disappeared. She ran the causeway west with the tide going out. The bridges didn't open. The turns shouted the way only turns do when the world has been kind to them in the dark. She kept the radio on, low, because it felt rude to close a door on a voice that had counted her. Weeks later, over a sandwich eaten standing up at a tiny counter that pretended to be a truck stop and mostly sold bait, a man with sun welded into his cheeks said, "You hear the county finally replaced the console at 7? Last lightning storm cooked it. Still works," Yara said. The man laughed a small, friendly laugh like an engine idling. "Always will," he said. "Dale's been talking to that box so long it answers even when it's off." "Dale?" "Dale Kemp," he said, "was tender on that run when my mama was a girl. I listen in when I can't sleep. He tells people what they already knew they should do. That's the best kind of help, not the loud kind." He opened a cooler behind the counter and fished around. "You want a soda that tastes like the color it is? Or coffee that tastes like a boat?" She took the coffee. It tasted fine. She told the story sometimes in the dry tone good drivers use when recommending a road to someone greener. She said, "On the coast, watch the bridge signals, not your mood. If a voice that knows more than you calls you blue stripe, say, thanks and do as you were going to do anyway, a little slower. If the water glows, let it. It's none of your business and all of your company. Touch a latch when someone asks you to. Use the bay they tell you to use. If the gate is up and you still feel held, wait for the second short. And if somebody on a radio you don't remember turning on says hold for 3, count them with your breath, because sometimes crossing is a thing you do while something under you opens and closes, and the only job you have is to be the right weight in the right place for the right amount of time. That's not haunting, that's work. And nights on a causeway, when the deck rises and the water writes its quiet phosphorescent vowels against the world, work is its own kind of mercy.